Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to what would be season 2 if we did seasons, but we don't do seasons.
Yep.
It is Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Coming
Winter.
to you, that's right. Season 2, maybe. Coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 formerly tangent-stained cube of science.
Winter has come.
Winter is... Oh, yeah. So how would he say that? If it's come. You know, he's always winter's coming. What does he do when it's come? Does he just give up? His job is done. Winter is here. Shit.
That's when the job begins.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a theme for today. Aside from the fact that like it's All Souls Day / All Saints Day / Day of the Dead / Halloween. The theme is going to be why? I think it's the science's least favorite question. They want to tell you how and where and when, but as soon as you ask them why, they just want to say, why are you even asking that? So, you've been listening to this Sean Carroll guy.
Yeah.
I hadn't listened to him before, but I have been listening to him now, and I agree that he's a great replacement for Feynman.
Quantum physicist.
Yeah, an eminent materialist, just like Feynman was.
Yep.
Like, I'm listening to this guy, and I'm just like, man, you're badass, dude, but shit. I don't know. There was a lot of stuff that he said that I felt was, he had ontological certitude on things that he didn't seem like he should have, so...
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. It's cool.
Laura just walked into the studio.
She's
looking at us like we're dead.
Yeah. Those are ghosts.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I came up there to ask you, and then when I came back out, Kyle was like, I got it. So, sorry about that.
Okay, bye.
Bye. So all of our previous episodes are now dead. I went back and deleted them. The project folders, not realizing that all of
the little clips and shit that we used,
were like the audio files were in those project folders, and now those are gone.
Right.
And so I still have bumper music because the bumper music was located in other project folders
that you did not delete. Yeah.
Whoops.
That's
so
all right.
we had Laura come out and do a quickie.
Yeah, quickie for the intro.
On the intro.
Which is why it sounds slightly different.
Yeah.
But it's better.
And I used a different mic and had brand new problems. And I kept messing with it. And
the moon was like waxing gibbous or something.
Yeah. So Russ went in to ask her to do it again. And then we started.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, hey, can you come out
and
and just kind of do this one more time? She's like, sure. I'm like, sweet. And I go out and we just start recording. She opens the door and she's like, what the fuck?
Comes in smiling and then suddenly...
Yeah.
Oh, shit, what's happening?
Not what I was expecting. So, I don't know. Like, I really dug a lot of his stuff on his ways of explaining things. But at the same time, he was just as annoying as Feynman.
Yeah, I pretty much expect physicists to be materialists because that's their specialty. Their specialty is materials, and they look down to the finest, most minute aspects of material and see, that they're trying to figure out how it works. And
yeah, but there's a specific, I think there's a specific kind of physicist who is a materialist, and that's because just like Sean Carroll and like Feynman, they do not want to talk about why, and they find all kinds of ways of avoiding it. Like Sean Carroll not only believes in the multiverse, but he also goes with the many worlds theory. So in other words, he uses these things to avoid asking why at every possible turn. He never has to ask it because he has these answers. I don't have to ask why because the multiverse answers why we have this particular universe. I don't have to ask why the electron does this as opposed to that when we look at it, because the many worlds theory does everything every time. So he doesn't want to talk about why, and he has these thought forms that allow him to not do that.
The other thing he talks about though is, I think it's called Bayesian Reasoning. Is that the right word?
I haven't heard that one yet.
I don't know if it's the name of a guy.
Okay.
And it's a way of reasoning where you're never actually saying, yes, this is true, and no, this is
false.
not true, or whatever, or this is impossible and this is possible.
Yeah.
You're only saying, what is the probability that is possible?
Yeah.
Right.
And my question is always, what is the probability that you actually know the probabilities?
You don't. But the way you use the reasoning is like, somebody can say, we have non-local, non-material souls attached to our bodies.
Yeah.
And you can say, okay, well, I don't, like, regardless of your bias, you can be like, well, what's the probability of that? Like, and you look for things that either support it or don't support it.
Yeah.
And like, you get to a point to where you can say, well, I think it is more likely that it's all material.
Yeah.
And less likely that there are these non-local things attached.
Right.
And you can keep looking for evidence. And so one of the things he talks about is, like, for certain things, you can't even really get close to finding like a really high probability of something.
Yeah.
But for a lot of things you can, but you'll never be able to get 100%.
Right.
So
yeah. He always says, well, you have to leave the possibility of maybe.
Right.
But
So
he's not.
You
really.
you get close to something. Let's say you're at 90%, then you can pretty much, like,
And then
you
Trump
could spend
wins.
the rest of your life. Yeah. You can spend the rest of your life looking for the 10% that you're missing, or you can say, well, I can pretty much accept that as
Yeah.
that's most likely true.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna move on.
And when I'm listening to him, I hear him doing that, and he's doing it easily because he has all of these. He has all of these, like, constructs that he uses to avoid looking at evidence that would otherwise exist. Like, in other words, the many worlds theory completely removes a shit ton of questions that you would have to ask. There's zero evidence for the many worlds theory, but it's convenient, right? And like, as a mathematician, he also finds it beautiful. In other words, it gives you symmetry. Everything happens. There is no like, why did this and not that? It's all, right? It's very beautiful to a mathematician that it spreads out into this enormous fractal. So like, he does this at every turn, and thus avoids ever actually getting close to where he could see evidence for things that he doesn't believe in, and that's why he never finds it. And then he has this, like, almost 99% certitude. I heard it all throughout. Like, he's giving these explanations, and I'm just like, yeah, man, but you've set it up so that you can't see the evidence.
I don't get that impression, but I know that I
don't think he did it on purpose.
He's a materialist.
Yeah. So being a materialist, how would he even arrive at places where he could think about something like a soul? He just doesn't think that way, and his bias is to, like, even if he's like, okay, I really genuinely should try to answer this question, he's never going to be interested in it enough to sit down and ponder what it could mean, how it could work, how it could connect, because he's not interested in it. So he's never going to, I
didn't get that impression either, because he does talk about, like, I can't name what videos or whatever that I was listening to, but there's quite a few where he talks about the possibility of spirit and all that, and all the time he's saying, like, yeah, I mean, it's possible, but I don't think that's not my particular viewpoint. I kind of look at it like this, and I think about these things, but it is possible, like, that's kind of the way
he's always said. That he always says you have to leave, because we don't know for sure on anything, so you have to leave open the possibility that this may be true, but I really doubt it. It's basically what he says. Like, I
don't find a problem with that.
I find it highly. No, I don't either. I'm just telling you my impression of him. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's a problem. He's but it makes me completely suspect his entire quantum analysis because of that. Because, like, he totally misses the concept of consciousness being fundamental. Now, I know that there's no certitude in that either. But he, like, went through the whole, like, okay, so here's how they messed up the Like the explanation of the collapsing wave function, it doesn't work like that. This is what's actually happening, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, but you're completely ignoring other stuff that doesn't work like that does give you this evidence. Like the fact that people can think at random number generators and change them. Like that isn't, I mean, if there's some kind of like interference pattern happening there, how and why is that happening? Like consciousness is interacting on a basic level that isn't through an instrument. It isn't because we're aiming a camera at it with other waves coming out and turning it into an interference pattern. Somebody's just sitting there and thinking at it, and it may not even be at that time. They could like sort of store it in a storage box that they open up a month later, push a button, and then it changes the randomness. Like that is in the quantum realm too. But so like the fact that he completely misses that makes me just question his entire interpretation of the quantum realm. Even though like it's his mechanical explanation of it is awesome. It makes it so much clearer, and like I love how he kind of like gets annoyed. You know, he's like, yeah, so this is the part where I get annoyed because this is where people who are too lazy to really understand it have then tried to explain it and botched it. Like that stuff's funny. That's hilarious. And then he explains it much more clearly and it makes sense. But he also, I guess I haven't listened to him enough to see what he's going to say about quantum teleportation and entanglement. I don't know how he's going to handle that. I also don't know what he thinks about the string theory. Has he said anything about that stuff?
Yeah, he said that it doesn't really work with the newest data they have in quantum physics. Huh. Like its string theory has basically, it's still extremely popular, but it is not viable anymore as a theory.
Wow.
Or there are very large problems.
He's claiming that there's like observational evidence that is completely in contradiction with string theory.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Wow. Because I was listening to somebody explain.
Like I think he was comparing it to quantum field theory, which is now which is the standard model today. Like
for quantum physicists, who none of which agree with each other. At least that's what he says. He's like, none of us agree. There's no consensus, so you can't really say, even though it's like sort of the cutting edge science of physics, we can't say what it is because none of us agree. But we always fight with each other.
But he said like unequivocally that quantum field theory is the
that's the operational model right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the best thing that they have right now
for predicting. Yeah. That's what he said. Yeah.
So, talked about string theory in comparison to that and how string theory just has like big problems. And he's not saying that it's not true. Again, he's just like,
right. He told
it's unlikely that this is going to work out because there's huge problems with it now.
Yeah. And he tells he has this great thing about truth. Like what he talks about, or maybe that was the other guy I was listening to. Maybe that was the other dude and not Sean Carroll. The one that was talking about truth and how he finds it to be a very not a certitude. In other words, that somebody can have an idea that is true, but it is not true in the case that they're telling it or using it.
Yeah, that was
that's the other guy. Okay, yeah. I listened to those
Weinstein.
I listened to those back to back. So
Eric Weinstein, I think.
Confused maybe. Yeah, so that was a great point because he talked about several times because he's several times in physics this happens where somebody has an idea and it really strikes them as badass and they sort of publish it, and it turns out after like all this, a lot of people glom onto it. They're like, wow, that's great, and then they do a bunch of experimentation and discover it to be falsified, except that it isn't really. What they falsified was that guy's so he has this beautiful idea that he then turns into a narrative. In other words, he says he has this fundamental concept of like dimensions being wrapped up on themselves and being really tiny. And then he tries to describe this enormous system that they then go and falsify. It doesn't work, right? Well, then later, like almost half a century later, the same idea pops back up of just the part about the dimensions being wrapped up in themselves, right? In other words, and then they start applying it in this completely different case, not at all the way he was explaining it. But when they applied it here, it worked extremely well, and it started to pop out equations that we already knew about. Like, in other words, it started to pop out things, our equations for explaining the electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces were just coming out of it like automatically, like sort of implying that they were plugged in correctly, right? So in other words, that guy's idea was not false. It was true, but he constructed a story out of it that was not entirely accurate. Right. And so the dude talked about him. He was like, I think of him as like scaffolds, right? It's an intermediary step between the enormous badass stone wall and nothing. The scaffold isn't the wall. And it's not so it's not the truth. but you have to have it to get, and if somebody just comes in, it's like, that's not the real wall, and knocks it the fuck down, then you're never going to get the wall, right?
Right.
So I thought that was a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
That there's a kind of an totalitarianism of truth that can be destructive, right? And he said that Feynman was guilty of this.
Yeah.
That was interesting. He's like, Feynman was like, if experiment shows you to be wrong, you're fucking wrong.
Right. The example I remember was that he was talking about how he was looking at these particles, and he was like, everything must have an anti-particle or an opposing particle.
Right. Symmetry again. Yeah.
And so he made the false assumption that I think it was
somebody tried to say
the
that
proton and the neutron were.
Somebody tried to say that the proton was the antiparticle of the electron.
That was the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, well, they were like, no, because it's way too.
But this was like a long time ago,
right.
And like he kind of set it up like that.
They discarded the entire.
Right.
Yeah.
The entire premise. But then later they found out that there were all these anti-particles for every particle.
Yeah.
He turned out to be right.
Right.
But the way the guy was explaining how this happened was that his version of the story was incorrect, but the actual fundamental aspect of the story was true.
Yeah, like I saw it as like he has this fundamental idea of like, wait, every particle, because of symmetry, every particle has an antiparticle, right? That's the fundamental concept. Right. And then he's all excited. He's thinking about it. He's like, wow, so maybe the proton is the proton is the antiparticle of the electron, and he says that stupidly, and then people say, all right, we'll test that, right? Not anything else, just that part. They test it because we know we can test. We can see electrons and protons, so they test it. It's false.
And they find out one of them had like way more mass than the other one.
Yeah, the proton is far heavier than the electron, even though their charges are diametrically opposed. So they're like, no, that's not correct.
Yeah.
Entire idea
theory.
wrong.
Yeah. Theory wrong.
Theory wrong. False. Yeah. Completely falsified. Throw it away. And it didn't come back up until way later when somebody found the positron, which is the actual antiparticle of the electron. It is a particle with the same mass that is positively charged, a positron.
Yeah.
And you know that stuff is antimatter, right? The antiparticles are antimatter. If you construct atoms out of antiparticles so that the protons are negatively charged, and of course the neutrons, they're just fat assholes. They get to stay the same. They don't have a. I think the quarks may be arranged differently in there, but there's no charge in the neutron. So you just have the same number of neutrons and their quarks are a different triangle shape or whatever. And then your electrons are positively charged, and you can build entire molecules out of this shit. That's antimatter.
Yeah.
And it's completely opposite. And so if you let them touch, they will annihilate 100%.
Yep. They will unwind each other.
It is called full energy conversion, and it is incredibly destructive.
Yeah. We just need 2 atoms of that shit.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The anti-bomb.
And there's a weird question about that too. Like, there's a whole bunch of, when you dig down into this kind of physics, you find all these fascinating questions. Like, why is there anything? Because, like all things considered, in the Big Bang, an equal amount of matter and antimatter should have been created, which means they should have annihilated each other and left nothing but. In other words, the arrow of entropy should have been very quick and long and fast. Like all of this stuff annihilates, and then you have just nothing but heat waste spreading outwards into nothingness. No mass left, right? And yet somehow all this annihilation takes place, but there's a little bit of what we call matter left, and almost all the antimatter is now gone. So there was a little bit more matter than antimatter generated in the Big Bang. Why?
Well,
they're like, don't stop asking that question.
If elastic universe hypothesis is correct, perhaps then it is that whatever explosion happened in the Big Bang or whatever, it wasn't so much about making matter than resonating fields.
Right.
And so it doesn't.
And I think they're almost saying that too. They just don't quite see it fully as that, because they're talking about the patterns they see.
Yeah. So like, let's just say that you take a bunch of matter and a bunch of antimatter, like 2 bowling balls, one made of antimatter, one made of matter, and you go out into empty space and you throw them at each other.
Right.
And they, quote unquote, completely annihilate. But the explosion is so ridiculously powerful that it actually resonates fields that are no longer, that haven't been moving.
Yeah.
They haven't been. So like with the Large Hadron Collider,
because they're getting power levels that are so high.
Yeah, they've got these really high power levels, and they take these tiny little particles, and which are basically like little pockets of energy, and they smash them together, and that explosion,
they get dissonant
it's
notes.
Minute, but it's so powerful that it actually shakes mediums that are sitting still.
Yeah.
And so they see these what they think are
New
or what
particles.
they thought were new particles, but really they're just resonances in these fields
that are
that
really
were not,
loud.
yeah, but they're resonance in fields that were sitting still, that weren't being moved.
Okay, yeah.
So like the two bowling balls hit each other, and the resulting explosion is so powerful that it creates matter,
Okay.
quote unquote matter, because
It creates it directly from the energy of the explosion.
yeah,
Which is what
the
Big
energy
Bang
of the
was supposed to have done
explosion resonates, the ether or whatever,
Yeah.
various fields in new ways, and so new matter is created. And so if you had an empty universe and these two bowling balls, perhaps you could create a whole brand new system.
Yeah, but still in that situation, you would still want to ask, how do you end up with at the end of everything? Because that sounds like you end up with a cycle of explosions, right? Because you throw the bowling balls together, they have this enormous explosion. Patterns appear in this immense dense energy, and then new matter is created. Some of it's antimatter, and then you have the same cycle again. They annihilate, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And why do you end up with some dust of matter and not any antimatter left? Like, is it?
I guess what I'm thinking is that something will be, or it's possible, I guess, that some of the energy will be sustained. In other words, in the explosion, you're not going to have like the exact same result as what caused the explosion, like two equal parts of completely opposite energy. You take the two, like, in other words, you have the two equal and opposite things, and they result in a net positive because of the
It's
energy,
full energy conversion. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's how I think of it.
right. So the full energy conversion of these two equal and opposite things actually results in a net positive result.
Okay.
So
I see what you mean. I know
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking. I know what you're saying. Yeah, that there's a net. In other words,
I shouldn't say positive. There's you've got something.
you have to
at
run
the
it.
end.
You just run everything through E equals mc squared to find out what the energy level is going to be, right? Because on one side of the equation you have E energy, on the other side you have mass times the velocity of light squared. It doesn't matter whether it's antimatter mass or just regular mass. It's m.
Right.
So if I have these two bowling balls, m equals the weight, the mass of those two bowling balls. I multiply that mass times the velocity of light squared, and that's what E equals. That's the amount of energy that's going to come pouring out of this explosion.
Right.
So it's going to be enormous.
So
right?
you could say that if there was no other universe around and it was just these two bowling balls of matter and antimatter, then let's say briefly, a couple 100 billion years or whatever, there was a time during this explosion where there was where on the way to high entropy, there was like incredibly complex systems
Absolutely.
in the explosion.
Yeah. And I
So
mean,
that's kind of like,
also the whether you call it quantum field theory or, and I don't even know, like, are we explaining all this stuff enough for I can't even remember now. Are we just randomly
just
talking?
skip to hour 2 'cause
Yeah.
we'll probably end up doing the second segment on the same shit.
Okay, so like the actual space-time, like, so you have the space-time thing, and it can only hold, each piece of it can only hold so much energy, and so you have this whether it's quantum field theory or what do they call it, the 0 point or whatever. So there's all this stuff happening on it, and then if you dump that much energy into it from this explosion, maybe, because this is, I think, what they think about the Big Bang, that in certain areas space-time itself warped in strange ways, and that caused local inconsistencies in the otherwise totally homogeneous energy output, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, so 14 billion years later, we're looking at the sky with like the Kepler satellite, which is like, it just looks in the deep infrared, right? It tries to ignore all the bright shit, and it's just looking at the background, all the dark, because they're trying to map the background radiation, which is basically the leftover stuff from the Big Bang. And there's enormous patterns in it that, if you kind of go rewind everything back, they started out as something ridiculously small, but it results in this huge,
Yeah.
like when bread dough rises, if you put some little patterns in it and then it rises, you have this enormous pattern.
Yeah.
Or like blowing up a balloon. So they see that stuff.
Yeah, or put shaving cream in a vacuum chamber. Little dollop of shaving cream in a
it's
vacuum
like-
chamber. It's like, bam! It's
Yeah, you're like, that's universe. Yeah. So okay. So
And if you put a piece of little grain of sand on that dollop of shaving cream and then do it, it starts really changing.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
Yep. You really have messed up everybody that has to live in that model. Hell of a little
But
guy.
yeah, I see what you're saying. So like, I'm trying to visualize what you're saying.
Yeah, because I always have to. For me, total energy conversion is almost completely. It's so energetic that it's homogeneous by nature.
But if
space itself is getting torn and ripped and shit as this is happening, you can see how patterns can begin.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say too, is that if whatever these fields are, these quantum fields, we don't really know much about their properties other than that things travel at certain speeds in them and whatever. It takes certain amounts of energy to move them.
Yeah.
You know? So like they may have like at ridiculously high energy levels and ridiculously high compressed areas of ridiculously high energy, they may act in strange. You might rip one.
Yeah.
For example.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I
don't know.
So basically, you can say that in the center or inside this almost so enormously energetic events that we can't even imagine them. That within them, things can happen that can result in enormous patterns later on that can have surprising effects, right?
Yeah.
That then end up so if some little thing like that happens in the Big Bang that results in this like tiny heterogeneous piece of the Big Bang, otherwise completely homogeneous, right? There's this little part that's not quite like any of the rest of it. But, down when it's still like only a centimeter inside, when the whole universe is like a centimeter across, right? The Big Bang has started, but it hasn't been going very long, like fractions and fractions of a nanosecond. And the whole universe is a centimeter across. Inside that little tiny thing that contains all the fucking energy of everything in the entire universe, there's a little inconsistency.
Yeah.
And that single tiny fucking inconsistency that is basically a representation of a piece of space-time that can't handle all this energy, right?
Yeah.
It just can't handle it. So it starts to flap a little bit. As the entire thing expands, that one event can result in why there's some matter left over when all the antimatter is gone, and why that shit begins to spin out into galaxies. In other words, it results in everything that we see.
Yeah.
That one little fucking tiny error.
Yeah.
The bad note in the fucking,
Yeah.
in the initial resonance.
So one of the along that, one of the ideas in the Sinoverse poem,
Yeah.
slam poetry poem,
Yeah.
is that this idea that the Big Bang was actually this tiny,
Yeah, it was
ridiculously
a
small
singularity
event. Right. It wasn't like some massive universal
No.
explosion. It was
No.
just a tiny little inconsistency.
Yeah.
In a singularity.
Right.
And so it kind of takes in this idea that space and time were the sort of entropic result of that inconsistency.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that those in other words, it needed more dimensions to exhaust.
Right. It was like
the
not
energy.
enough something.
Yeah, not enough
Of
everything or anything to deal with this
Yeah.
inconsistency.
I'm trying to explode here, for God's sake.
So like I imagine it kind of like what you're saying, where this web, basically the explosion that we look at as the Big Bang was really a 4-dimensional explosion.
Yeah.
It was it resulted in space because it needed that.
Right.
To
I follow that model too, that space
exhaust
itself was created along with, so in other words, because they talk about the inflationary event, right?
Yeah.
And it's still kind of going on, that space is inflating, but like you start out with no space, there isn't any space, and then suddenly something needs desperately to explode, but it has nowhere to go.
Right.
So it generates its own explosion area.
Right.
It's dragging the space along with it.
Right, and that's not enough.
Right, it's
So
not enough.
so it does it for a while.
Yeah.
Right, and therefore time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
so.
yeah, I can't do this all at once, guys.
Yeah, I can't do it only in 3 dimensions.
Right.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
It must take a duration.
Yeah, like I know I just invented those 3 dimensions, but I need another one. I need time to do this.
So one of the other ideas in elastic universe that we've talked about, and we haven't really fleshed this out a whole lot, but that is that there's this idea that space is expanding everywhere
Yeah.
might be the result of, or that maybe not the result of, or I don't know. Another way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Another way of looking at that is the overall resonant tone of the universe is dropping.
Right. So you start out with something extremely tiny and like incredibly high pitched. Basically, if you're going to think of it in terms of sound, it's like, but then as it expands, right? And as that frequency changes, the things that can exist within its own harmonics also shift.
Right.
And so that results in like the increasing complexity of things that we see over time. Like you need time also to increase the complexity, but as the resonance shifts, it allows new forms to take place.
Right. And in acoustical physics, like when you have a fundamental note, resonant note.
Like the acoustical physicists are like the guys way down at the end of the hall with the dirty office. Nobody cares about them.
One chair.
Yeah, they don't even have a blackboard.
A drumstick.
Just a trash bag.
But I shouldn't say that in acoustical physics. I just when you have a fundamental tone, a fundamental note of something, right, is the lowest possible resonant frequency of that thing. So if you had a bell.
Yeah.
The size of the bell, the mass in the bell is going to determine the fundamental, what that lowest note is. But
the bell,
it has all these higher harmonics, and the frequencies of the higher harmonics go on and on forever.
Right.
Because you can continue to divide that bell equally.
Right.
Over and forever.
Yeah.
So that it contains within it all these higher frequencies. So in other words, the lower the fundamental note is,
the more resonances you can have. Yeah, and I thought of that too.
In a medium.
Yeah,
so if you think about it in terms of if the bell is the medium,
right,
it can only
vibrate in certain ways. Yeah,
you can only divide it by however many atoms it's made of.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah, once you get to that point, it's like I can go no higher.
Yeah, I can't. There's nothing.
I can't even.
I can't even. But anyway, so the medium. Whatever these quantum fields are, they have to have some. They have to be made of something. Maybe not things or whatever, but I imagine them as
they have a property.
Yeah. Some type of property that results in harmonics.
Yeah.
And so if the tone, what I was getting at earlier, screw all that. I can't explain it. Can't even think about it. But if the tone is dropping, then the pattern of resonance would be expanding everywhere,
and they would be shifting across form, right? Because as the tone drops, the harmonics will, like, if I always imagine it in terms of cymatics, the tone dropping in this fucking pattern is shifting. So it not only is it expanding, but it's also it's adding parts to it because now it can have new resonances. The pattern, the overall pattern as a whole will also change nature. Will shift to new forms, and like that's exactly.
And if you have these massive galaxies that aren't expanding, but they're actually pretty well contained, right?
Yeah, at this point,
they may be adding different secondary effects to that expansion and causing certain areas where there's like big clusters of galaxies not to expand so much as other areas.
Yeah, and like because of elastic universe theory, I now think of galaxies as not as spiral arms, but as having this long lifetime. Like because when you look at them in the beginning of the universe, they're little blobs and shit. They're not beautiful and spirally and stuff. But over time, and as the galaxies get closer to us, basically, because that's getting closer to us in time as well, they shift, they change, they take on different natures. You begin to see these ones with two big arms. They're called bar galaxies. Right?
Yeah.
They have a central thing, and then they got these two big things coming out, and then those begin to curl, right? And they also run into each other and cause a bunch of havoc. But then you end up with these gorgeous, like really close to us, like we look at Andromeda, which is right next to us, and it's just amazing spiral.
Yeah.
So to me, that is and that's also an increasing complexity, right? The initial blob is not. It's got a bunch of complex shit, stars and all that stuff. It's complex in and of itself, but it's like a single cell. That's not a very complex life form, even though it is complex, right? But as time goes on, you see these galaxies become complex in their macro structure, which they didn't have initially.
Right.
And to me, that's an excellent depiction of what's happening. I also liked the the whole hidden curled dimensions thing, because they were talking about how we don't know what form they would take or what shape, and I'm like, oh well, we probably could figure that out pretty quick. Because thinking about it in terms of elastic universe, I don't know. When I was listening to those guys talk about it, and they're like, and so this is the part we don't understand. We don't know how to answer it. I'm like, well, that sounds pretty easy to figure out, coming from the elastic universe idea, and how they would shift over time, because they were talking about that too. How at the beginning of the Big Bang, these curled up dimensions would have a specific form. But then over time, you see these fundamental phase changes that the universe takes on, right? It has phase changes that it goes through that are very definite in terms of like right after the Big Bang, they call it the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Right, because the universe is so dense there that all the light is generated, because it's an enormous explosion. All the light is generated and can't get out. So we see it as just it's black, right?
It's like attenuated, like in water or whatever.
Yeah, and then suddenly it has the whole thing has expanded and cooled enough to where it just suddenly all at once becomes transparent, and the light's all comes out of it, and like so. Then that begins
like the fog lifts,
right?
You know?
That is the cosmic microwave background, is this sort of foggy, very dim all around. It's everywhere. That's the very first thing that we can see from the early universe, and then after that, stars begin to form. Right, and then they start to explode, and that throws. Suddenly, now we have more complex. The stars start to make more complex elements, because at first there's just hydrogen and helium.
Yeah,
and that's it. So it's a very, very high pitched universe with few with few harmonics. It's so fucking high pitched that the harmonics are very few, and you just have these very simple, non-complex forms of hydrogen is like a single proton, one electron. That's it. There's nothing else. But then the stars begin to form, and then they begin to cause fusion, and they make everything up to iron, and then they explode and make everything all the way up to gold, and all the way across. They generate the entire.
See, that seems to suggest to me that, because we're making more complex, or the universe is making I don't know. It's not us, but
the universe is making
It's making more complex. Sort of combinations of these things of these quantum energy pockets or whatever. That the idea of there should have been matter and antimatter or an equal amount made in the very beginning is sort of invalid. Like it's like that energy output caused the existence of these energy pockets, and then the secondary effects of those collecting together and creating stars and all this kind of stuff starts combining them. So they're still being used, like the fundamental particles
absolutely
that were created. So you could say,
but just be clear that all the antimatter stuff happens in the Dark Ages. It's long done by the time anything stars take place.
Yeah.
Like, it's gone. Like, there's no antimatter left. Unless there might be really terrifying pockets of antimatter out there where, like, one day we fly to it and just annihilate.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to land on this,
Right. Well, I want to make another point about this. Anyway, we got to take a break.
We need to take a break. 7 minutes over, which is okay.
Yeah. 7 minutes and 77 seconds.
7 minute abs.
Wait a minute. Wait.
That was wrong.
That's a snake minute. Snake of the Dead, Day of the Snake, Snake Bros podcast in the 10 by 10 by 10 inch cube of science with the door open because it's finally cool outside. We don't have to.
Cool.
We're not sweating. Well, at least I'm not.
I'm not either now. It's great.
At the end of the break or at the end of a segment, we don't have to turn on the air conditioner.
Yeah.
We can just open the door.
Open up the door and let in the dead.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
We're wearing sheets over our heads with little eye holes in them so we look like ghosts.
They're
snake ghosts.
They're brown sheets. Okay.
Just brown ghosts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there are other guys that wear sheets, and I'm just saying.
Is my sheet brown? I thought it was white. Holy shit. I can't see anything in here. Anyway. Okay, so I wanted to kind of go back to the matter-antimatter thing. Not really. Just in contrast with this matter-antimatter
And I should
idea.
say that the question of like whether...
No, you shouldn't. As a matter of fact, I'm saying something.
Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Just keep... I just want to clarify that the idea that there should be an equal amount is not... No one proved that. They just said that it seems like it should be that way because of symmetry. Yeah.
I wanted to actually talk about something in chemistry that I thought was interesting that talking about the matter-antimatter thing reminded me of. So sugar molecules have this specific geometry, and they're, all the atoms are arranged in such a way that...
You going left hand, right hand here? Is that where you're going?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's
very strange. Yeah.
So we can make sugar artificially, and when we do it, there's no control over which way it is, left hand or right hand or whatever. But it's not really left to right.
It's a mirror of itself. Like it works. Everything works if it's just a perfect mirror of itself.
Yeah.
So that's left. That's why they call it left right. It's but
if
you're looking at them laying like
it's
this,
not really left right because depending on which way you're looking at it, you can't tell which one's left and which one's right.
You have to put them together to see which one's left or right. And then,
but you have to be looking at them from a specific angle.
You have to decide which part is the top.
Yeah. Because if I was standing on this side of it,
Yeah.
we'd be
Well, you're
it's
left-handed, so it wouldn't even matter.
Anyway, so all sugar in nature is one way.
Yeah, it's left-handed. Yeah.
And it's not left-handed.
Oh. Shit.
The only way to determine the difference between left and right is by some freaking
arbitrary center.
Weird, like, mu meson particle that freaking spins off of a freaking some weird reaction in some kind of decay.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It's there's actually no way other than that to determine the difference between left and right. Like, this is some problem that physicists were working on for a long time. Like, is there actually a difference? And they were looking everywhere. And because depending on your perspective, it changes. And there's no way to...
Well, I know if you don't have the other one, it's hard to tell which one you're looking at, right? Like, if you've just got the example of what nature's sugar, you don't know which one that is. You see what I'm saying? But once you've got them both... You could then set up an arbitrary set of coordinates and be like, okay, so here, this is the arbitrary right one, and this is the arbitrary left.
Yeah. You could just decide that this one's left,
right? And then after that,
or you could decide that one's right.
Yeah, but then after that, you can recognize the left and the right ones everywhere,
right?
Because you know.
But if you were talking to an alien, somewhere else in some distant system, and you don't
know left and right,
and so you were like, well, the one that's like pointing towards your left hand is the left one. Wait. Like, how do you know? How does he know?
Right.
It's like, well, okay. Then you'd have to describe like the human body and be like, okay, so the heart is on the left side.
Right.
But wait,
for some reason,
when you're facing forward, put it on the.
It's on your left.
How do you tell him? How do you tell him which way to go with it?
Yeah, wait, I got to tell him it's his.
So
left.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Then anyway, the point is that in nature, this sugar or sugar is always this one way.
Yeah.
The molecule is always arranged in this one way. And when we make it artificially, it makes both.
Yeah.
There's no control over which, it could be mirrored, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of them. But then when we put bacteria in there that eat sugar,
it only eats the one part.
Yeah, they only eat the one that's in
nature kind,
that the nature makes.
Yeah.
In that direction. Yeah. So they can distinguish between the two.
Right.
So we can actually.
And we all know the leftists don't like the guys on the right, so they won't.
Yeah. So we can go like we can get this artificial sugar and then put this bacteria in there, and the bacteria will eat all of the nature type sugar, and then we'll be left over with this perfectly artificial sugar that
no one can
nature will not eat.
Yeah, that's right. So you can just stash it outside, and ants will leave it around and everything.
I just think it's interesting that when we were talking about matter and antimatter, that the universe seems to have a method, like a way that it does shit.
Yeah.
And then when we sort of try to synthesize something, even though it's within the universe.
Yeah, we're doing it wrong. So we don't have the part that synthesizes just that one kind. Yeah.
Right. So I was just kind of comparing that to the matter antimatter thing. And like maybe for whatever reason, that like little
There was
thing you were talking about, that little sort of like inconsistency,
Yeah.
resulted in all of this stuff just being made in this way. And yes, it's possible to make antimatter,
Yeah.
but that's not how it happened here. Maybe it did, but I'm
Yeah,
just saying.
I mean the very idea that that a shitload of antimatter was created in the Big Bang is also theoretical.
Right.
I mean, any antimatter explosions would have taken place long after the initial energy output thing, and so we wouldn't even know what we were looking at if we were seeing evidence of those explosions everywhere.
You have to be able to see
to
know what you're looking at.
Yeah, and we definitely can't see in the Dark Ages where that shit would have taken place. Yeah, and I've thought about that whole. Now I feel stigmatized for calling them left and right.
No, you can't.
What do you even call it? What do you even call it? Like
I'm just trying to talk to you. I was trying to one up physics on you. Go
I
ahead.
have a meson that like bounces off the fucking. Yeah,
I probably got all those names wrong too, but there's some type of.
They have a process that they use to determine.
Yeah. They finally
And it's
found
like
this,
atomic?
It's some. Oh God. It's some decay.
Okay.
Right, and when this decay happens, this like weird particle that I'm not sure what the name is,
Okay.
like comes off of, like when if you have the structure or whatever, and you're like you've got the proton, neutron, all this other stuff over here, like it decays into like 3 different particles or whatever, and this one particle goes off, and the spin is this particular direction every time, and it always, so like if you align yourself where you say, okay, you've got this particle in front of you, and where the decay, when that particle comes off, it's going away from you or something,
And then it flies in your face.
it will be, yeah, then you know that you're not oriented correctly.
Yeah, or that you're looking at the other kind of sugar or whatever. Maybe.
I'm talking about in the decay,
yeah.
in whatever this way that they figured out
Okay.
how to determine, how to actually explain to some other person
Oh.
left and right.
Okay.
Were we? I thought that's what you were talking about.
No. Well, yeah, you were talking about how there's this way to determine which one it is. That's what I thought.
To make a distinction in nature between left and right. Yeah.
Right. So if you've got your nature sugar and you've got your orientation set up right, then the meson should always fly off in this direction, spinning this way. Right. Is that the kind of the concept?
Except it doesn't have anything to do with the sugar.
Well, yeah, just saying whatever your molecule is, like whatever the whatever
decay
it is. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's going to be decaying out of an atom, right?
Yeah,
Or a
yeah.
subatomic particle.
It's some kind of
Right, but
subatomic-
you're aligning yourself to because the atoms aren't reversed, are they? I mean, we're talking about molecules here, chemistry. The molecules are what can be built mirrored, not the atoms, right?
Yeah. I was talking about the 2 different sugars are a completely different thing, other than the
Oh,
left.
you're saying the way to describe left and right, period. Is that what
Yeah.
Okay. all
Had to
right.
do with some weird like decay.
Okay,
something beta decay.
Okay, yeah. I thought
I can't remember.
You're saying they're using that as a construct to explain to some alien life form. Here's what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah, this is the only way that they can that physics can actually use like the universe to actually make a determination of the difference between left and right. Is this one like beta decay or something? And
yeah.
there's this one little thing that comes off of it and has this spin.
Yeah.
If you're aligned with it in this certain way.
Yeah.
And that spin is always that way.
Right. And you're
And
like,
so-
and so that spin is whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that you were saying that this decay will help you determine whether your molecule is to the left or to the right.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. It just gives you the concept of left and right, and then you can say, okay, so if it's going this way, then it's okay.
Then you can describe to the
my
alien
sugar's
which sugar is. That's right.
Yeah.
So first he has to set up the experiment to do this weird freaking beta decay
Right.
thing.
The alien's like, what the fuck are these aliens talking about?
Yeah.
And then the thing goes spinning off, and they're like, everything spins. They're like, like all the time. Like, what if their nature was to spin? They wouldn't even know what you're talking about. You know, like what are the aliens that were in that movie?
But the idea is that if they could observe
Yeah, I know.
the same way using the equations and all whatever all this stuff.
I'm just saying, like a fish in water. How do you explain a water to a fish? Like, I'm thirsty. What do you tell him you need? He's a fish. You're like, I need water. He's like, what are you talking about? What's water? It's all around you. Oh my God, not one of these. So if the alien's nature was to always rotate, he wouldn't fucking know what you're talking about when you're saying this thing comes out rotating. Of course it is.
Well, if he was rotating, then he would be looking at it, and then he wouldn't. And then
Well,
he'd
he
be
would have.
looking
He
at it
has
again.
eyes all the way around.
So he should still be able to see it spinning.
He has radial symmetry, like, you know. That's what I was saying. Those aliens in that movie that everybody was raving about for a while there. It's called shit. It's like Contact, but it was not. But they make contact with these aliens, and they have radial symmetry. They're like octopods or whatever, and that makes them have a very strange way of thinking about time.
Yeah,
there's no front or back, forward or backwards. They don't have that, and so
circle.
Yeah, everything's like you see equally to the rear of you as you do to the front, right? And so their language constructs. When the humans started trying to learn their language.
It's called Arrival.
Oh, The Arrival, yeah. It was a great short story. The humans start trying to learn their language, and the very act of the language is, of course, changing their brains, because that's what languages do when you learn them. And so the researchers learning the language begin to see the future and the past as equal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the one lady. Like
yeah, well, they both do it, yeah. In the original, I never saw the movie.
Oh, okay.
The original story, it's a male and a female, and they are like xenobiologists. And
This always happens, folks.
What?
Like, me and Russell will be talking about a story. I've seen the movie. He read the book.
Yeah.
I didn't even know the book exists. And I start telling him, he's like, no. This is how it goes. And I'm like, no. Then he's like, yeah, I never saw that.
I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the book.
There's a book?
It's a short story, yeah. It's written in 1942.
Can't tell you how many times this has happened.
Or how many times I just like tell you're talking about something crazy, and I'm like, I read a science fiction book about that one time.
Yeah.
Because I've read like every science fiction in existence, at least up till the death of Arthur C. Clarke. But yeah, I've always probably read a science fiction short story about whatever you're talking about. Just any given topic, I've read about it in science fiction before. So they're basically just doing it in space.
And then he goes online and he reads all the comments.
Yeah.
And so he knows every different way that everybody pretty much looks at it. And so then you're like, well, I look at it like this. Yeah. And then finish.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, you're talking about when it's like this and this. Yeah, like that guy said it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea, except for there's this problem. And when I was talking to that guy, he was like, yeah, I don't know about that part.
That's why I like when I actually come up with an idea that you haven't read about.
Yeah, I'm like, holy shit.
And there hasn't been any comments that have posed this idea, and you're just like, what?
Whoa. Then I go make the first comment and blow everyone's fucking mind on the internet.
I do have like a punch dance like after that. Russ leaves.
Go out and punch
Russ leaves quietly, and I punch dance.
I'm like, I gotta go think about this. This idea that I've never heard. I haven't encountered one of those in years. But this leads to the away from the physics into the why. Like we were talking about this. We took this kind of like unplanned long break, and like it. So during that time, I kept thinking that maybe we'll be doing the podcast this week or maybe the next one. So I kept planning stuff out, and then that didn't happen. And so like at one point I watched an enormous number of TED Talks. I watched one. I was like, that was badass. And then I thought like I've watched like 5 of these, and every single one of them is badass. How come I haven't watched more? So I just like got my YouTube thing on like every TED Talk and press play. And just for the days I was listening to them, 20-minute talks, and they were badass. Some of them weren't that great, but most of them were really good. And they're really condensed. Somebody who has this enormous amount of experience in some given field shows up and for 20 minutes tells you everything badass he knows about that field. Like it's really, it's a really cool idea. And one of the things that was discussed many times by people who were doing sort of the less scientific, more social science kind of thing of asking like, what are people doing and why are they doing things? And so they're talking about like motivations, or they're talking about like, what's the difference between people who succeed and people who don't? What is the difference between people who are generally happy and people who aren't? What is the difference between, companies like Apple and companies like that aren't Apple, and there was this sort of consensus between these people about motivation and about the way you approach things. And then also about, like for Apple, it was a great example. The guy was like, so there's these 3, he draws these 3 concentric circles, right? And he says the outer circle is the what, and then the sort of middle circle is the how, and then the very central circle is the why, right? And he's talking about this is like everybody has these things for whatever they're doing. Like whatever you're doing, you have a what you're doing, a how you're doing it. Which so the what you're doing is on the outside. People can look at you and watch you doing it and kind of see the what, right? Even if they can't tell what it is, but that's the what. It's on the outside. Like more occulted by the what is the how you're doing things, because you may have to have that explained, even though they're doing it right in front of you. It's not clear, But the why is totally occulted. It's completely hidden. It's it's in the center of the person that's doing it, right? Or the center of the company that's doing it. And that's the one that's the least often explained because people don't approach that. So he was like, so almost every advertising you see for any given thing, and he's talking about tech in general. So he's like, so you'll see an advertisement for a car company or for a new technology, and they say, look at our technology. You know, this is the what. Here's our technology, and blah 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 blah. And then they say, it'll do these things for you, and this is how we put it together. Don't you want to buy one? Right? And you're like, well, you know, that could be effective. But what Apple does is say they start with the why, right? They're like, we want to think differently. We want to make beautiful things that you want to take with you everywhere, and we want to change the world with them. And here's how we're going to do that. And here's what we're doing. Don't you want to buy these? And you're like, fuck yes, you know. So he was basically saying this changed his whole world, and the way he looks at everything. Like he also talked about Martin Luther King. He asked the question of how is it that 250,000 people showed up they were in the right place at the right time for the "I Have a Dream" speech, the most famous one he gave in the Washington Mall, when that was before social networking. This is like these people did not have access to newspapers and there was no advertising, and yet 250,000 people showed up, right? And he just kind of walked out there, and there was no event planner. Like, how did this happen? And he was suggesting that it was because when you explain the why, you get people on your side because they see what you're doing and they now have the why. And the why is always what motivates us, right? The what doesn't motivate you. I mean, it may in an abstract sense, like you're thinking, once I build this thing, I'll have the what. I'll have this thing. It's cool. But having the what is not the
but it's still a function of why. Like
right. Having the what is also a function of how. You've got to figure out how, right? Yeah. So the way people do things is they have the why first. So your internal motivations always start with the why, even if you don't realize it. Yeah. The why is in there, you know? And so you move immediately to the how. How am I going to do this thing that I'm driven to do? And then you end up with the what, right? So we all do everything from that inner circle outward, and yet most of our communications with people, trying to sort of get people involved or get people interested or whatever, starts from the outside in because we think of the way they're looking at it. And you say, so here's what I'm doing. Here's how I'm doing it. Yeah. Right? And you don't approach the why. And so they may be interested, but it's an abstract interest. They don't have the why inside them. In other words, but if you do give them the why, they suddenly have, at least in part, your same motivations. And they're driven a little bit, just like you. So the reason all those people showed up on the Washington Mall for that speech is because they did the advertising themselves. They had heard his whys in his other speeches, and now they were like him, going out and giving mini speeches to everybody that they knew. They were like, oh my God. And they're telling people, and they're getting them involved. And so there was just this enormous why motivation to show up there that was like grassroots, because it didn't have to have a central control. But it was because and the guy was like, it's because he said, I have a dream, not I have a plan. Yeah. Right? So he imparts the dream. You can impart the plan. You know, you get up there to your corporate director or whatever, and you're like, okay, so here's that plan. We're going to blah, 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 you know. But that doesn't motivate people. Yeah. But if you get up there and you say, you know, and this is what always happens. You see these movies, the war movies, and before the major battle, the general dude gets up there and he starts walking back and forth. He starts shouting and banging his palm into his hand, and he's giving them the why, right? That's what that speech is. It's the why speech. It's the women and children back home. It's the everything you trained for. It's the to protect your brothers in arms. In other words, he's giving them the why they're going to go out there and get shot at and keep doing it. You know, if he got up there and he was like, so we need to check all our equipment, and and then he gives them the whole plan. Like, that's not going to motivate him. That's not going to keep that guy from pissing his pants. But you get up there and he always gives this enormously motivating speech, and it's always about why we're doing this. Yeah. So that was really awesome to me, that whole thing. Because I was like, here's how you start a cult. Not really. Cults are usually have like fraudsters at their center. But anyway, I thought it would be cool to kind of do that with this. Like, why are we doing Brothers of the Serpent? Why are we doing this? Yeah. So What's the time here? Now I'm confused. I don't know.
Yeah, I forgot to start
I
the
don't know what
timer.
that clock means.
And so we've got about 7 minutes.
Okay. So you want to roll off on some whys? We can switch back and forth.
Yeah.
I just gave this enormous monologue, so now it's your turn.
All right, enormous monologue. 7-minute monologue. Here it comes. I would just, before I get into this, like to say that I think that's badass. And while you're talking about all that, I'm applying the idea of communicating
The why.
the why in a lot of these things that I do. Like I'm also a musician and have a band and I make music to be published.
Right.
Why am I doing that?
Yeah. And I mean, you get people to follow you because they have their own motivations because they think you're badass, they think your music's great or whatever. But if you can give them some of your motivation,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
then they're really on your fucking side.
Like I've always dealt with the what.
Yeah.
And I don't
And
even
the how.
I don't even really go into the how.
Oh.
With
You're like, you should know this or get
It's
out.
like we've talked about like, well, we should do, sort of documentary footage of us in the studio. That would be the how.
Okay.
Like, how are we doing all this?
Or like, I was thinking how in terms of musically, you're like, you'll sit down with somebody and be like, okay, so here's how I wanted this to go, and here's how I want
With
this.
the band,
Yeah,
but I'm talking about with the people that we're publishing the music
Oh, okay, gotcha.
for just whoever,
Right.
the world,
Yeah.
putting it on the internet for
Yeah.
anyone to download,
I see.
and
You wanna
never
communicate the why to them.
like don't ever communicate why.
Yeah.
And like even like I did some I put my music on a website where the music was available in a search engine for people that make movies, and they can
Yeah.
search it and then they can basically license the music to put in their movies. And they wanted descriptions of the songs, like
Yeah.
what they were about and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of did that. Like I wrote
Yeah, I remember that.
sort of why this song,
Yeah.
but
What? You wrote like a little bit of what this
Yeah,
song
yeah.
and then why, yeah.
yeah, but not in general.
Yeah.
Why do I make music?
Right.
And so anyway, while you were saying that, I was just like, dude, that's like, I need to do that because I can immediately see in your explanation, thinking about your explanation, that is exactly what would get me motivated to join someone or,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes like, I'm watching somebody like kiteboarding and I'm like, I already know the why.
Yeah.
Like that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, because it's fucking awesome.
It just looks fucking awesome.
I was
And
like,
like,
well, I kiteboard because I found out I could slice sharks.
yeah, well, wow.
Right. Now you know the why.
It just looks like badass to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're like what you were talking about with Apple or whatever, the or sort of in your description of somebody actually doing something in front of you, like they're, especially if it's art.
Yeah. You can see the what sort of.
And you can see the how
kind
a little
of,
bit,
yeah.
like how they're carving something
Yeah.
or whatever, but why are they carving it?
Right.
So that's really in music, like what's been really motivating me is why am I doing this? And this is something I've been thinking about for the past year or two, like very deeply.
Yeah.
Like, why am I making music?
Yeah.
And it's even led to like new songs and new lyrics because realizing like why actually is aligning with why I'm doing this podcast.
Right.
And I think I think this podcast has also made me realize, why I really want to do music, because when I was a kid and I enjoyed playing music, the why was very materialistic. It was well, but there was some.
Well, that materialistic thing was kind of there already.
But there was some deeper part that it was like, oh, I want to change the world, man. With my music.
Yeah, but
how?
But
and
yeah.
why? Like, what is it about the music that's going to do anything? And I
Yeah.
realized at some point that like that's dumb. Like,
also it's kind of clear. Well, I don't know, but I would say that it's clear to me that before you had even thought about any of that shit, so you didn't know that there was a material thing possible from this, or even like a change the
when I
world
was
thing. You were
really
still
young.
doing it. Like in
Yeah,
other
yeah.
words, there's a deeper why that has existed from the start.
that's true.
Yeah.
And that I can just say that I got great enjoyment from
Yes.
the beauty of it.
Right.
But later, like when I formed my first band, I was like, you know, fuck yeah, kick ass, like
Yeah.
become one of these rock stars that
Yeah.
that I think are badass.
Right.
And then some weird sort of not really fleshed out idea that like somehow my music is like going to be important in some way.
Right.
That I later realized like, no,
It's going to be Wild Stallion-esque. Change the whole future and do a different thing.
it's just like, it's just, I'm just like writing these little songs about shit that I experience in my life. And I wasn't really looking at it in terms of art. It was really like what you and I do in this podcast and thinking about history, humanity and history, like in the universe and all of these things that made me realize why I do art.
Yeah.
And I think for me, why do art is no longer because it makes me feel good and like, you know, because I'm creating something badass that maybe other people will like. It's not about that anymore. It's about continuing or I guess creating something, and for lack of a better phrase, setting it in stone, like putting something down that actually has relevance to humanity in general and our time.
Yeah.
And
You're
then
constructing something timeless.
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a little bit, but it was really this.
Also, there's kind of I've been thinking about this recently too. Like, there's something in alchemy in art. Like, there's this, like, you know, the common sort of meme of the suffering. You know, the artist is always disturbed somehow, right? And he goes into his studio and he's like, rah, rah, and he fucking makes his art. So there's an alchemy there of taking sadness and turning it into a flower or something. Like,
Yeah.
You know, you take these negative things. I mean, they don't have to be negative. I'm just using the meme, but you take these things and you convert them into something beautiful. Or horrifying, or whatever, you know.
But see, that's what doing music has always done for me personally, is that I can have something that I'm upset about.
Yeah.
And if I write a song about it, it's like, bam, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like it fixes it. Turns that
baby, I miss you. It's so cathartic.
it's like it fixes it in my head somehow. Like I'm okay with it, you know.
Yeah. You've expressed it.
Deal with it.
Yeah.
But so with the podcast, like there was an initial sort of surface reason why I wanted to start.
Because I was like, we're going to fucking do this now. You're like, okay, Jesus Christ.
No,
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
It was kind of like that. We were talking about how we need to get into this now because there's other people that are doing it and they're getting together with each other, and we want to be involved in those circles of people looking into the ancient past and maybe get on board with some of them because we respect them and like their material.
Yeah.
And we feel like we have something to offer. And that was something you had told me.
I mean, we already do offer it. They just don't know. I mean, like, you know, I'm so involved in this stuff online that, like, you go to any website or any forum that deals with this stuff, and I'm in there somewhere. You can find me in there talking to people.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm heavily involved in Graham Hancock's website. Like, right now, I've got an enormous amount of posts that I have to answer because people are flipping out about the cart ruts thing that I put on there. I mean, like, that, I see how long that list. I was like, oh my God, I don't even have time to look at that. But yeah, so we do contribute because I have noticed how the things that we have thought of in our discussions, how people receive that. Because I'll go and type it out and be like, so what about this? And they're just, and like, they are really receptive to it. And a lot of times it's not anything anybody's thought before. Because we, you know.
And that's what I was saying, like, just to kick this whole thing off, this whole topic, is that the original, I would say this is more a surface why. The deeper why was there long before.
Yeah.
But the surface why was like, we need to just actually start putting something down, set in stone, recorded, that we can publish so that we can get involved in a new way with these other people who are doing a similar thing with podcasts, and join that
community.
Community.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna stop there because we're needed to take a break, but
Okay.
but we can get into the
Keep going on
to
that.
the better, deeper levels afterwards.
More why. Why of the snakes? Snake-wise.
Snake-wise! W-I-S.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, wise ones. Fuck the scriptards this time. We are talking about the wise of
Welcome
the wise.
back to NP Snake. We were just talking about why topic, and that was a wonderful piece by Aethrum Studios.
All right, NPR, get out of here. Oh! Get him out! That's right. Throw him into the steak pit. That was gross.
Who the hell was that guy?
I don't know. So, on the topic of like the motivations and the why, I don't really know. I keep thinking about this. Like, what is the heart of the why circle for me in this?
Okay, for you.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You still have stuff to say. Go ahead. You had stuff to say.
I was going to finish my monologue here.
Yeah, just tell me to shut up. Like, don't let me carry on. It's like, hey, bro, wait.
No, but I'm interested to hear.
Yeah,
you're
too soon.
So for me, I don't know how else to describe the motivation that I have. I guess that's what it is. It's motivation.
Yes, it's absolutely motivation.
I am freaking obsessed with history and particularly ancient history.
Yeah.
But I can't even say that because like all the way up until like last week, right? That history.
Yeah.
As it compares to ancient history and all of it. And including the history of the universe, like all of that, everything that I've learned from talking with you and digging into these great mysteries has just, I feel that that subject is paramount. Like,
yeah,
there is something, our future as humans, the human race, I don't know how to describe this. Like, I feel like it is paramount to our future as humans to know what is going on here.
Yeah.
And these discussions that you and I have had for years on that topic and on trying to figure out how the universe works, on top of that, has inspired me in so many ways, and I have a desire to share it, just like Martin Luther King with his "I have a dream" speech.
Yeah,
like he had a dream, and he wanted to share it.
Yeah,
and I feel the exact same way, and I felt the same way with my music too. But I didn't really understand the why as deeply as I do now because of these conversations that we've had over many, many years about really who we are and what we are doing here. And it's fascinating to look at these great mysteries in the universe and in human history to help kind of, like you put it the other day, put these pieces of this grand puzzle together.
Yeah.
And I've always been a person who I love riddles.
Yeah.
And when I get a new riddle, or if I create a new riddle, I share it.
Yeah.
Because the process of someone coming to the answer is, I love watching that. I love being a part of that.
Yeah, you're the kind of guy that like walks the maze and then finds a way to stand above it to watch other people also walk the maze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see how they figure it out, and I also want to know, like, you know, because other people have their own way of looking at things, and it's like so many times you can be describing something you've been thinking about for forever to somebody, and they're just like, blah blah, and
You're like, holy shit! Yeah.
Did not think of that.
Yep.
And that's great, but if removing all of that, if there was just like without the podcast, if I could have imagined a way to just share all of these conversations that have like continue to blow my mind for years and like excite me about the world that we live in and about humanity and about our past and about our future, and really like they motivate these conversations, and the things that we've learned and discovered together have motivated me in every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
And it's not only just to like kick ass, but it's like in every aspect. Like what I do at work as a farmer, I am like, you know, from day one we were like, so this is what ancient people did, you know.
Yeah. About high time we learned it.
Yeah, grapes and olives.
That's
okay. Right. But learning the chemistry and just learning the land and the cycles of these plants, I started thinking about things like that. Like these, you know, past humans learned these cycles, learned how to cultivate these plants, and did all this stuff, and so it inspires me, like what I've learned in these conversations with you, to really dive into the farming.
Yeah.
Just full on all the way. Like I want to know everything. I want to, and every time I learn something new, I'm like, ha, and it's like,
yeah,
I love it. With my music, it's the same way. Like discovering what ancient peoples did with their art, and that they used a beautiful form of art in architecture, and they put mathematics into their art forms, and all of these things about the universe that they had discovered. They put it in a building out of the stone that they put together. Made me realize, like, that's how I should approach music.
Right.
The way they incorporated these fundamental cycles of our solar system into sort of like verses of text. I'm like, holy shit, that's how I need to approach lyrics.
Right.
And it's not because I want to copy them. I do want to copy them, but what they're doing, I don't want to.
You're doing it. You're finding out how to do it in harmony.
Yeah, I want to do it because it's a way to preserve the things that we have achieved. As a human race.
But it's also like, if you do it, this is why I think they were doing it. It's preservative, but it's also, this is the right way because this is how the universe is doing it. If you also do it that way, it harmonizes with the whole universe.
Yeah, and it teaches you. It also, as you do it, if you attempt to do it, it teaches you things.
Absolutely,
like, so if you're carving a piece of wood, or you're trying to make something out of a piece of wood, and you're thinking about things like the golden ratio in the proportions.
Yeah.
Then you begin to like see very interesting things.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm just making this up, but like the rings of the tree as you're carving into the side of it, trying to make this sort of golden ratio curve.
Yeah.
Could like make this badass pattern coming out of it that looks like,
you
know what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
it's stuff like that I've found when I just, every time I'm building something, I'm always thinking about these, you know, sacred geometry aspects of it. And it always turns out badass.
Yeah. You came up to me, you're showing me something you were carving for salt, like some car.
Yeah.
And you were like, yeah, and I used the golden ratio, and I was like, oh, well, that's why it looks right.
Yeah, it looks like a car.
Yeah, and it was still half complete, and I was like, why does it look exactly like a fucking car? Like, everything's in the right spot. It was, you know, normally when people are making something, you can see like, okay, the tire's a little off, or something's wrong. But it was just like, wow, it looks right. And then when you said that, I was like, oh, well, that's why. Like it's almost like cheating. You don't even have to try to put the things in the right place; they just go.
Yeah.
there.
So I made him a set of blocks. You know, and all the blocks I cut to the golden ratio. So their proportions and how their width to their length.
Yeah.
Were a golden ratio.
You know he's gonna build something in that thing one day. It's just gonna like open a portal.
Yeah. So I used it like a puzzle piece because every block is the same size, and I made 30. What did I make?
33.
36 of them.
36.
And it made a perfect rectangle.
Yeah.
Right. when you put all the blocks together in the rectangle, it's also the golden ratio.
Right.
So
it has to be.
Yeah. So I started like building all these structures out of the blocks, based on their own geometry. And it's like
it's intrinsic.
All these structures, like you can build this structure over and over and it looks freaking kick ass.
Yeah.
Then I started discovering that I could teach him proportion using the blocks, because I can make a rectangle.
Yeah.
And then I can hold one of the blocks and stand up and hold that block in front of me and look down and see it perfectly covers that rectangle. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then if I bring it closer to my eye, it covers the outside of the rectangle. Or if I go down, it covers the inside of the rectangle. It's like all these little things. I was like, dude, this is
this thing on the floor is to the block. They're the same.
Right.
This block has the same proportions as that thing, and it was made of these blocks.
That's right. Yeah. And it's like all of these things I've discovered playing with these blocks that he's not really old enough to really discover those things yet. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm like, so I learn all of this stuff from just using these things. So that's the kind of stuff that's what I mean when I say these conversations and the things that we have learned together and this whole journey has inspired me in every aspect of the things that I'm interested in my life. In every way, I'm always like comparing or thinking about these things in reference to what I'm doing. And so the why I am doing this podcast, I would say that the most fundamental thing about it is that I have gotten so much. It has changed my life.
Yeah.
These types of things for the better. It's made me realize purpose in everything that I do that is so farther beyond just like, oh, I want to get rich and become badass. It's like
it goes even beyond existential in the sense it's like, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like, for example, when I record a song, I'm not thinking like, I hope this song becomes a hit.
Yeah.
What I think is, in terms of wanting a song to become a hit, it doesn't need to be a hit.
Yeah.
Now.
Right.
It could be a hit if it was known 1,000 years from now, discovered 1,000 years from now. That's what I think about. Like, is this song worthy of being preserved?
Yeah.
Far beyond my death.
Right.
Because of the information and the beauty of it.
Yeah. Or is it something that like may be accidentally preserved far beyond your death, and then if it's rediscovered by somebody, will they
learn something from it?
Will they then propagate it because they're like, oh my god?
Not only that, but would they if they translated the language,
yeah.
would it teach them something about the universe? Would it teach them something fundamental?
Yeah.
And I love that idea, and I'm not trying to say that I'm doing that. I hope that I can. It drives me. That's what I'm saying. And so the fundamental why is that I want to share this that has inspired every aspect of my life with everyone and put it on the internet and have it be available and hope that that people listen to it and get out of it the why that I have.
Right.
Because it's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Sharing the why. That's really meta because that's what you're doing right now too.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, here's the why. I want to do this because I want to tell you about the why.
But until you brought this up the other day, I didn't think about it in those terms. But there's always this level of excitement when we discuss these things.
Yeah.
And it's also cool, like, fuck yeah, we're finally doing this podcast where we're actually recording it and putting it out there in the ether.
Yeah.
And so there was this excitement, but until you brought it up, I hadn't really focused on why am I excited about that?
Right.
And that is the answer. Because I hope that I could be the seed that inspires somebody else to just like dive into this shit and discover things for themselves, because it's so motivating in every aspect of life.
Yeah. That's cool. I have some of that too.
But otherwise we're going to get hit by like a massive rock from outer space and we're all going to die.
Right.
So
right. So somebody's got to say this shit.
We're doomed.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. That's actually kind of. I have a hard time with my why because like I think all of those things that you just said, like I'm gonna do this is kind of like this conversation we had reversed, right? Everything you just said I agree with, but right? We had this conversation a couple of nights ago,
right?
Except I went first and then you came second, and I'm like, yeah. So everything you just said, I totally agree with it, but there's this other thing.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I was not really able to communicate. I mean, I I tried like 3 or 4 different ways of getting at it. And as I was saying the things I was saying to you then, some of them were new to me as I was saying them. Like they were being created. Like I was having the realizations as I was talking. And I was like, wow, that's really cool.
I call that fleshing it out.
Yeah, but it was still not what I was trying to get at. And then I would try again, and then I'd be like, wow, that's also really cool, but it's still not it. And then I remembered episode 2. That's kind of like, it's like almost like I kind of did it then. Like at the very end of episode 2, out of nowhere, I just announced that I've had this recurring dream about the Pillars of Enoch. And what I was doing there was explaining in some, like, because we had just finished this enormous podcast full of all these tangents about ancient weird shit. And the Pillars of Enoch are a sort of symbol of ancient knowledge, but specifically ancient knowledge that if you discover these pillars, it will be given to you. Like, in other words, the discovery of the Pillars of Enoch symbolically is the acquisition of all this ancient knowledge. Okay. So I still have this dream. And like it's affecting me to the point now where, like, you know, this is going to sound really strange, but this is affecting me to the point now where I will be considering, I try not to do this in public, but I will be considering like something just amazing from the distant past. And I have these glimpses of the potential of the people that did these things, right? And I can't even stand. Like I literally have to sit down, and I'll start crying. Like it's really, I've never had anything like this happen to me before. I don't know why it's so powerful to me. It's emotional on some kind of fundamental level. But it's and the emotion that's happening is like this incredibly deep sense of loss. But there's also this kernel of like, fuck you in there. Like there's this anger. Because, you know, so at first, when it was first beginning to happening, I was noticing the anger more. I was like, what is that? What is that? Like, I would feel frustrated, right? Like this, like even though there was this deep sense of loss, at first I could only pay attention to the anger. Like there was this sense of like, God damn it, right? Now it's still there, but I've now noticed how small it is because I've allowed myself to sort of pay attention to the grief. Okay, because I started to question that, like, what is this do? Where is this coming from? Is my question. Like, what's going on here? And for a while, I was associating it with the dreams because in the dreams, I feel this grief. I have this I see the pillars. I can somehow read them, but it's not really reading. When I see them, I suddenly remember. It's more like remembering, and I just know all of this shit. I know the entire history of the human race and all this amazing shit that's happened, but it's been continuously destroyed and smashed. Right. And so there's this enormous grief because I'm like, oh my God, like all the stuff, all the people, all of the ideas, the beauty, the you know, just kind of like the take everything badass about humans and then magnify it times 100 and then smash it on purpose. Right. It's like that. It's just there are these visions of cultures that had a much more full understanding. Like right now, our understanding of a lot of things is very lopsided and it only looks in certain pieces. So we have this, like, you know how dangerous certain types of machinery can be if you don't have a full understanding of what they're going to do when you turn them on.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how we interact with the universe and with ourselves. We don't understand ourselves. And so we have these inherently dangerous cultures where basically you can just walk out into them and get shredded, you know, and it's not anybody's particular fault. I mean, it will be a human that does it to you or whatever, but it's really, like, in the grand scheme of things, you're getting shredded because the machinery is being operated by people who don't know what it does, right?
Wow.
Huh?
That's a badass analogy.
So I see in the dream, I see the pillars and I see what it's like when we do understand the machinery. And I can't even describe it, but it's so fucking awesome and beautiful, but it's gone. So there's this.
We finally understood it too late, or is there not really you don't know why?
I don't know why. Okay. All I know about the gone is that it's not our fault.
Yeah.
In other words, the gone is coming from like something else is destroying it. It's not us.
Yeah.
And it was deception and a bunch of other shit. In other words, we were tricked. Like, I don't know. I'm not really clear on that. I just know that it's like, holy shit. We were like a child prodigy, you know, in a protected place, like playing beautiful music. And then some like fucking pedophile jumps in there, rapes the fuck out of them and murders them. Like, you're just like, what the fuck? You know, like I mean, that's a terrible analogy because it makes it base, but you just have something beautiful and also innocent. Like, it's playing with the universe, right? The cultures that I see are joyful in their creations. They're just having a shitload of fun doing all this crazy badass stuff with the things that they understand. And there's no like, I can't say there's no suffering because we live in a material realm, but they understood why we were in a material realm. They had this full understanding of what's going on. Okay. So, and like, you know, the thing about suffering is if you're suffering and you have no idea why, that makes it terrible. Right. So a baby or a person who is like unable to think because they've had some head injury, they don't know why they're in pain, and that makes it last forever. And they just scream, right?
Yeah.
But somebody who like understands that I just got into an accident, the pain is terrible right now, but I have this contiguous timeline in which I see previous to the pain, and then I see why it happened, and I understand that it's pain, but I also understand that at some point in the future it will lessen. That makes it
a little more bearable. Yeah.
You don't scream nonstop, right? So right now we're like the person. Our suffering is like the person who doesn't know why they're suffering. We just scream nonstop because we don't understand where it's coming from or why it exists. These previous cultures that in the dreams I see through the pillars, they didn't have that. They still suffered, but they knew why. And so it was bearable. Okay? And there's so many things like that I can't even begin to describe. And then there's always the remembering, like, but it's fucking gone.
And that's why you get pissed.
And then it's gone because it was taken or destroyed or whatever, right? So yeah. So like this, I think, is the heart of my motivation, that our potential is hidden in these mysteries that we're studying.
Yeah.
Okay. Like not yours and mine, but like just
right.
All of us. And like there's some kind of that it's okay. The potential is there, and it's possible to get it back. Okay, it's possible to get it back, but people have to look for it.
Yeah, people have to seek it.
Yes, it has to be sought. Okay, and it's really so it's really difficult to seek because the first time we found this knowledge, we didn't have all of the like the handicaps that we have now. Like they were still learning, but they were innocent. Okay, they were learning from a place of pure ignorance. They didn't think they knew anything, so their learning was pure in the sense that they didn't misconstrue shit. I mean, they probably did, but they weren't like telling themselves the wrong story all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I may not be explaining this very well.
No, it makes sense.
So now we're trying to learn. We have to unlearn a whole bunch of crap that's caused by the fact that we've been screaming for all this time that we lost this shit. Okay, so we have to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff, and like there's all these cultural barriers, and there's enormous political barriers, and there's social barriers. I mean, just it doesn't matter. Like there's 6,000 years of stuff telling us that everything we're trying to look at is wrong and bullshit, or it's not worth looking at, or whatever. And there's also some kind of force, something. I don't know what it is. I'm sure people are thinking he's talking about aliens, but I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what they are. I don't even know if they're they. But there is something that wasn't us that destroyed this thing that we were building, this culture, this understanding, this potential, right? This future was completely erased. Like sometimes I think about the Fermi Paradox, the Fermi Paradox that basically says, where is everybody? Like when we look out there, like we were supposed to be the everybody, like, but it was taken, and that's not really part of the why. I just that I'm trying to convey the gravity of what seems to have happened here, or at least how I see it. Like sometimes I just wonder, like there's a disharmony that has been happening, at least we know within us, for a long time, and it you can see subtle clues of it, like when you in our dealings with animals. Like why do animals treat us the way they do? You know, like there's this constant, like if humans are around, animals are like paying attention to everything we do, right? And like even if they completely know you're safe, you know, like there are some like in parks, they know they can run right past you. You're not going to hurt them. You're not going to chase them or whatever. But they're still really freaking wary of you, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't know. I see it in pets too. They look at you like, I don't know what they're about to do.
Yeah. Always.
Even though you've lived with them your entire life, I've never hurt this animal. I never would hurt this animal. But you make a sudden movement and they're like, what is he doing? And it's like, you know, and it's like they are aware that the human race is insane. Like they're aware that there's something fundamentally fucking twisted, right? That we're, I don't know. So then you ask, like, then you have to ask, like, why do the cats and dogs live with us anyway? Like, they're like, I'm literally living with a crazy person, right? That I don't know what they'll do at any given moment because they're irrational. You know, they're not rational in terms of nature, which is always like, I just need to fucking make sure that I've got food, make sure that I've got shelter, right? That rational in that way. They're not rational like that, but neither are they rational in their own kind of sort of ideas of rational, which is like always making logical sense. You don't do either one of those, you know, like sometimes you'll just flip out and start breaking shit and nobody knows why. And they seem to be aware of this. And so they're paying attention to you. They're like, oh, fuck. You know, you're like, I'm just shifting the chair, kitties. And they're like, oh, I don't know, you know? So, and we always, you know, you can see in the culture that people feel like we don't belong here or anywhere. Right. And it's because, or like the Native Americans will say, we don't live in harmony, right? Or they try to, and they say like, yeah, the Western culture, white people, you guys are not living in harmony at all. They're trying to, but they don't know what harmony is. They're not sure. They have these paths that are very ancient, that they hope are telling them what living in harmony means, but they also are aware that they've lost it. Yeah. You know, and they have the stories of the world being destroyed over and over and over by forces that are sort of beyond us. Okay. And so they have gone from, in their own stories, they go from like having enormous, very advanced civilizations down to like living a subsistence and sort of nomadic thing because they're trying to live in harmony and keep from being destroyed again and again and again. Right. So my motivation, I guess, why I'm doing this is because the more people that are thinking about these things. I mean, number one, like all the stuff you said, it's badass to come to these understandings and be like, holy shit, except for when I'm like, you know, that's not badass, but I try not to do that in public. But when you tell these things to people and then they respond to it and they start thinking about it and you see them get excited about it, I love that. I totally fucking love that. That's really cool. And especially when because they have their own perspective, they say something that blows your fucking mind. You're like, yeah, I'm about to blow their mind. They're like, oh wow, blah blah blah. And you're like, like, so I love that part. So that's a big part of why I'm doing this. But I think, like, having tried to dig down all the way to the very bottom to the depths of the why is because there's something that we lost that we should be able to get back, and like, it's a tragic thing that we lost it. I can't do anything about that, but the only way I can think of to alleviate this like enormous grief that I feel is to regain it and have it again. Because then I can be like, well, that sucked, but you know, we're cool now, right? Like that's the only the things that we lost will always be lost, but and there will always be that sadness. Like, so even if this whole thing this story that I've just made up is true, and we regain all this knowledge, we'll never know completely the story of those people before. Yeah. I don't think. Maybe we will at some point, but most of their story is lost to us. That in itself is a tragedy. Like, this is part of the reason why we don't know who the fuck we are and what we're doing. Yeah. You know, this is why we have quant stuff everywhere. Like, we're like that lost expedition but the generations have gone on long enough, and enough tragedy, enough people have died, and enough things have had to be burned for just to keep us warm at night that we don't even remember that we are a lost expedition.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm trying to get back towards that knowledge. Like somewhere here on this planet, maybe spread out, maybe all in one place, that knowledge exists. All the ancient stories tell us that some people were able to hide it before these enormous destructions came, and then some of those places that were hidden were not able to be retrieved after the destructions were over, and then they were forgotten about, but they're still there.
Yeah.
So that's really my main why, is because I think that finding that knowledge is like we have to.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying too. That it's paramount.
Yeah.
That we, for our future.
Yeah.
That we learn our past.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that when you were saying it, and I'm like, can I fairly say that it's for the future of the human race? Because that's a really big thing. I know that I like that finding it will change all that and make the future of the human race badass. But I can't say that that's the why for me. Like, I don't think that that's motivational. I do love the fact that that's there. But for me, the why is more like the finding itself. Just to where if I could just sit down after we find it and be like, okay, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's going to be fucking badass too. You know what I mean?
But I totally agree with that. But why is that badass? Why is that cool? That everything's going to be badass. It has to do with.
I mean, that's what I would say.
What I'm saying is that it has to do with ourselves. And I've never really considered myself a person who thinks about all of humanity.
Yeah, I don't think that's really possible.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I've heard people say stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's never really resonated with me. But until we really dove into this stuff with ancient history and exactly all of the things that you're talking about, when I saw and began to see these patterns and in the way that knowledge and ideas had been preserved.
Yeah.
There suddenly, and the great lengths that we as a race went to preserve them for what?
Right.
Our future. Not the people who built it.
Right.
Not their future. But the future of everyone like them to come.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Like when I started to realize, like, God, they did all of this to preserve something.
Yeah.
So it must be like ridiculously important.
Right. Anybody who thinks about, like, we're going to go to this enormous amount of trouble to make something last 10,000 years. That you need enormous motivations to do that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying.
You can't be guilt tripped into that.
So what did they know that was so important that drove them to do these things? It must be great.
Right.
Right. And then thousands of years later, there were things that were written about those things.
Right.
And those things were so important, even though that they had quant stuffed it by that time.
Yeah.
That they were like, we must take these now and go hide them in a cave before this library burns because they are so important, but they don't know why.
Right. They don't know why.
And so I'm with you on that. Like, I totally agree. But I guess the way I extrapolate out is that it's for our future.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, maybe I don't have the full why of it yet, because like the future is something that makes me happy that it'll be great if we find this stuff. But I can't say that that's my motivation, even though that's definitely there.
Yeah. Because my motivation as well is more in the realm of my lifetime, right? My motivation is like, what can I achieve now?
I guess like, so going back to all these TED Talks I was listening to, now I can't even discern one from another. I listened to them in a row, so I don't even know which ones were talking about what. I just have all this stream of stuff that I was hearing. So I'm not even going to try
TED talking.
TED Talks. So this guy was talking about motivations or whatever, and like the if you want to really pare it down to like what are people really trying to do, period, just in general, and that is be satisfied with their life, right? Just kind of, that's whatever it takes to do that. And so I think that that even if we don't find them, but if we could just sort of push the pursuit forward noticeably, or get a bunch of people involved in it so that it becomes an actual, like, okay, this is an institutional fucking like search, like, or anything like that, anything that actually, that, like, I would be not just content but ecstatic to work in that field for the rest of my life. I would just be like, going to work every day would be great. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, just doing that as a not want to say job, just as a, that would be, I would just love that. I could go to work and work 18 hours a day, and just be fucking ecstatic all the time. Like, this is what I want to do. You know, pursue this, like, find this out, and then fuck whoever destroyed it. Because, you know, hopefully we find out who that was when we find the knowledge, because fuck them, like, whoever they were. And that's probably why they're trying to hide it from us, because they know that if we find it, we're going to be like, hey, fuck, what the fuck? Fuck you guys. And they're going to be fucked after that.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. It's a pretty diverse word.
All right, we're going to take one more break.
All right. Snake a breaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent, spreading the desire for knowledge all across the stony plains. From the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, we hail 2 snakes. Hail. And hail. Hail snakes.
Hail serpents. So it is, it's Halloween. We're in here recording and everybody else is out trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
And no kids have come to the door. I've been surprised. I brought some candy just in case they walked up.
Trick-or-treat.
Yeah. We built a badass scarecrow. You like the mustache again?
Yeah. The scarecrow with a mustache.
Yeah, I came down with
spinning pumpkin head
with a way better marker, and I was like darkening the eyes and shit, and I gave him some brows, and I was like, he needs a big Pez mustache.
he's got a Fez hat.
Yeah. So I gave him
the weirdest freaking
scarecrow. I gave him his long curl at the ends, you know.
Yeah, it's the strangest guy. I'm gonna go out there and like turn his head.
Yeah.
So he's looking in a different direction from time to time.
So there's a lot of. If you read people, sort of contemporary authors, or even not contemporary, you can go back into the Renaissance, Victorian Egypt, Victorian England, when they're discussing All Hallows Eve, Halloween, that it appears to be, it appears to be a celebration that has no purpose. You know, it's like. Where did this come from? Why are we doing this? I mean, now, especially, of course, in the modern period, it's about candy, and, you know, people have even lost the what trick or treat was.
Yeah.
Which I'm not even going to go into that stuff. There's you can follow this whole line of, like, Halloween seems to be about losing the reasons we're doing stuff in Halloween. Because, like, you'll have these little trends that appear, and then people will start doing that trend, and then eventually they quant stuff that trend, and then they don't even know that there was a quant stuffed trend, and now they're just trick-or-treating, and they have no idea what's going on. You know, it's like they go out there to get candy.
Yeah.
Right? And that's been happening with this like period for as long as you can look at it, any history about it. No one knows why, you know. But because of the modern age and the globalization of information, it's become a lot easier to look at this tradition and find out where it is, where it's celebrated, and what they do when they're celebrating it. And what's fascinating about it is that it seems to be global. So normally it's considered a fall festival. So typically it'll be considered to have it'll be associated with, the seasons and agriculture and in some way. So the fall, it's like the harvest, right? And a lot of times there's fire involved. So people would consider that at this point you've completed the harvest. The crop fields are just kind of dry, dead crops, and they've all been harvested or whatever. And sometimes they would burn them, set the fields on fire on purpose, right? So that you don't have this, over the winter, you don't have this dry, like sort of papery tinder out there that could accidentally get started on fire by lightning. So they would purposefully go out and burn the fields, kind of controlled burn them. And maybe that turned into the celebration, because there's the fire and the harvest or whatever. But the problem is that it's also celebrated in the Southern Hemisphere, which is like spring during this period. So that doesn't make any sense. And yet in the Southern Hemisphere where they celebrate it, it's also considered an agricultural thing. It's connected, but everywhere basically you kind of see these two. You see fire and agriculture, and the dead.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are lots of different names for it over history, just in Western civilization, like All Hallows Eve, or All Souls or All Saints Day or whatever. And sometimes it's a 3-day period. It's longer than one night or whatever. But there's really, it's considered to be a period where the dead walk the earth. Okay, so there's some fun stuff about that, like the reason why people dress up. Like we dress up now, and it's mostly like the dudes are all dressing up as something funny and the chicks are dressing up as something hot, and like that's basically how it goes, right? But the purpose, like the dressing up ritual, came from people dressing up or trying to sort of disguise themselves as the dead, so that they looked like the dead, so that the dead would not attack them on the night of the dead, right? So if you had to go out, you made yourself look like a zombie or a ghost, so that the ghosts and zombies would leave you alone because they think you're one of them, right? So that's why people put on these costumes. But now it's just like chicks are dressing hot and dudes are dressing funny. But there was a purpose of the costumes initially, that like this sort of disguised you so that you could go out amongst the dead on the night of the dead. All that stuff is really fascinating, but like really the questions come like, so why is it a Day of the Dead? Like, what does harvest have to do with dead people? What is, or in the Southern Hemisphere, what is the spring planting? I mean, spring is about life, so why is it the Day of the Dead? And then the fire. So I know like you don't like it when I read from the phone, but I have a couple of quotes from this guy. The first dude recently who was really getting fascinated by this, and it was a Halliburton. Yeah, it's one of those Halliburtons.
Oh man, it's probably all lies, paid for by the government.
But it's Robert Grant Halliburton from 1831 to 1901. So that's kind of far back to blame the government on. He probably never talked to somebody from the government. But basically, he was an anthropologist or whatever, and he traveled the world as an explorer, and he was kind of famous for discovering totally uncontacted tribes. He'd climb up some mountains or whatever and meet some people that just wanted his head or whatever. They wanted to shrink his head, but he would somehow convince them not to do that. And he would hang out with them long enough to learn some things about their culture.
He was colluding with tribes.
Yes, yeah. He was absolutely colluding with tribes. Yeah. And then he'd come back and change the president. But he was asked, so when he would come back to civilization, they would ask him to publish papers and stuff. They would, we want you to give a speech at this conference or whatever, tell us some stuff. And so there was one time where he was kind of like, what am I going to talk about? And he decided to work on, he was like, well, look at this Festival of the Dead. Because he had been all over it and he'd seen all these different people and they're all celebrating it. Like all these primitive people plus these advanced cultures are all doing the same thing on the same day. So he kind of was like, well, I'll ask this question. And let's see. It was, 1859. He was getting ready to present a paper for the Society of Antiquaries of London. So he's going to talk about the customs connected with All Souls Day And he realized that he says the coincidences in the observance of this festival by different nations were much more striking than I had first supposed, right? So he spends the next 9 years looking into this question. And he has some really... Well, this is the quote I wanted to read. And like for some reason, I hear it in this like weird English voice where he's like, "A new and most startling fact was discovered when I came to read over the paper I had prepared. It was singular that the Festival of the Dead amongst the ancient Peruvians was celebrated on the same day as the Spaniards, on All Souls Day, November the 2nd. I had also considered this merely as a curious coincidence, but it was generally observed in November south as well as north of the equator. A fact so remarkable that it was evident that whatever could be the cause, it must be something hitherto unknown." Right? I don't know why I hear it in that voice.
That's great.
I totally do.
Yeah, me too now.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Whatever the hitherto unknown something was that inspired this curious coincidence in regards to the universality of the Festival of the Dead. Further researchers revealed to Halliburton that the festival is now, or was formerly, observed at or near the beginning of November by the Peruvians, the Hindus, the Pacific Islanders, the people of the Tonga Islands, the Australians, the ancient Peruvians, the ancient Egyptians, and the northern nations of Europe, and continued for 3 days amongst the Japanese, the Hindu, the Australians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Egyptians. It was evident that the uniformity could not have been caused or preserved by any calendar now known to us, and that the festival must originally have been regulated by some visible sign or mark that nature had supplied to our ancestors and to the Peruvians. Okay, so he's made a fundamental realization here that, like, first of all, the fact that it's both north and south hemispheres means it can't be any kind of seasonal or calendar thing.
Right.
It must be global, and he's, the assumption that we don't have any global civilizations at the time. It must be something global that everyone could see all over the whole planet, okay? And that we would all, anyone who saw it would recognize and pull the same symbols out of it, right? This could be the only rational conclusion, right? So that the uniformity of traditions was, in fact, only a coincidence, unless, he says, okay, but if not the coincidence, the question then begged to be answered is what could have been the visible sign or mark supplied by nature? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff here, but basically what it gets down to is you're going to have the two things that the ancients looked at that you could say that was global is the stars, okay, and enormous cataclysmic events. So there's a whole bunch of other things in there that basically goes into the Pleiades and the different, the Scorpio is heavily involved in this, okay. So Scorpio, for anybody who doesn't know, Scorpio is considered a really bad sign. It's like this. Nobody likes that sign, okay. It's synonymous with death. Okay. And like without going to all the details, but if you guys are interested, Randall Carlson has some excellent articles about this on his website. So you can go to sacredgeometry.org and you can find these articles. Just look up
Sacred Geometry International.
Yeah, Sacred Geometry International, sorry. You could go there or you just look up Randall Carlson, Day of the Dead. You'll find the articles. There's 2 of them and they're freaking amazing. But basically the concept is the reason it's the Day of the Dead and the reason it's global is because sometime in the distant, distant past, something killed almost everybody on the planet. Okay? So, and it must have happened in November or late October. So Halloween is basically the anniversary of the cataclysm that ended the last ice age and killed almost everybody.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have fire. The torches, the fire is the remembrance of the fire in the sky, right? And the reason why the dead walk the earth is because everyone died, right? Yeah. And there's other weird things like.
And then you could, you could imagine that crops are part of this because nature was involved too.
Well, and the reason it's agricultural, possibly, this isn't so sure, but the reason it's agricultural is because it isn't until after that cataclysmic event that agriculture begins. So there's so there's some reason, like, so in other words,
there's a reason why we are no longer hunter-gatherer.
Right,
type.
We couldn't be. It was impossible. Like we had to begin to do agriculture because it was too hard to survive without it at that point.
Right.
Before that, it was more like Eden. You could just kind of walk around and there was food everywhere, and it wasn't hard. Like a lot of ancient or sort of more tribal cultures, or like anything that has people that have wisdom, ancient wisdom that's been carried forward orally or whatever. They always say when they're telling the story of the deluge, they say that after that, surviving was much more difficult, right? Before that, it was easy,
And it's very similar to the story of the Garden of Eden.
That's right. The Garden of
Being
Eden
kicked out,
yeah.
flaming sword guarding the entrance.
That makes the whole Genesis book really interesting. It's like you just told that story, right? Like you have the whole Garden of Eden thing, and if it's an allegory for how the world was before and then after the cataclysm, and then they start telling you about the flood. You're like, wait, you just told that story. It's been separated into like, here's the symbolic thing, and then here's the flood. It's really the same thing though, right? The knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, all that stuff is wrapped up in there too. The death and the good and evil. I've always wondered about, like, really think for a minute about being a survivor of one of those events. Because like every culture also has a flood story, and they have a very similar stories about the people who survived, which is hard to explain because there are going to be survivors like scattered all over the place. Why do they have the same story? That's really weird.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be similar in certain aspects. Like, oh my God, there's this enormous flood and holy shit, I was in the right place to not get hit by it or whatever. Right. Those elements would be similar, but that's not what happens. There's always a pre-warning. Somebody shows up a long time in advance and says, hey, there's going to be this huge cataclysm. You need to sell everything you own and build this huge boat.
Yeah. Here's some blueprints.
Yeah. Or they tell them to sell everything you own and take your whole family up to the top of a tree or up to the top of a mountain or dig out this log or, something like that. There's a pre-warning. And sometimes it's funny when the pre-warning is ignored. Some of the stories, the pre-warning is completely like skirp-derped and then like they all die. And then you're like, how did we get that story? I don't understand. Yeah. But this makes Halloween literally the most important like festival tradition that we have, because it's supposed to remind us about this thing that happened a long time ago. And of course people don't know, when you don't know that you need to remember something, it's hard to remember it properly, like oral traditions. There's this kind of a tradition within the tradition of like very precisely speaking the tales, like so when the old shaman is teaching his apprentice all of these stories, these cultural stories, these oral traditions that they've got, they're very strict on like, no, you have to say it exactly like I'm saying it, not just the words, but you need the cadence, the tone of voice. It has to be reproduced exactly. And then when the apprentice is telling the story, they make him do it over and over and over, and it needs to sound the fucking same every time they do it.
Yeah.
Like this is how they guard against errors, right? Over time, keep errors from entering into the data. It's really robust, it turns out. Like some of those Australian Aborigines have memories of like proven scientific events that took place 70 to 80,000 years before, and they have all this data on it. Like there's a lake in Australia that just was recently discovered. Okay, that's an ancient crater. And the tribes that live around there are like, oh yeah, and they tell their stories, and it has all this like very precise information about what happened.
Wow.
And so the Australian scientists are like, open-minded enough to listen to the stories, and then even open-minded enough to go out and see, is this right? And it is. Like they discover all this shit that like totally corroborates the entire, the whole story that they tell, and they're like, holy crap, like we can stop doing science and just talk to these guys. So I'm just saying that the oral traditions are robust because there's this tradition built in to preserve the data, to do error correction. Except that it didn't happen in this case. And I wonder why that is. Like, why did that not happen with this festival? No one remembers why we're doing it. I mean, there's this sort of surface remembrance that it's the Day of the Dead, but nobody knows what, what I mean? Nobody knows what the Day of the Dead comes from. Like, why is it the Day of the Dead?
Yeah.
So I wonder about that. Like, how did we lose that?
It's a good question. Well, let me just answer that question.
Come on, bro. I'm waiting.
Well, I mean, a lot of these oral traditions that we have, I think oral tradition is a technology.
Yeah.
And you could imagine that there was a time it was not needed. And so...
wait.
Before the destruction.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So we have these, stories about knowledge that's been preserved in pillars, for example, or buildings or some structure, or something like that. Writings, libraries, all these things. And that they were not, some of them couldn't be recovered, and therefore all the knowledge wasn't recovered.
Yeah.
So you could imagine that, let's say, some highly scientifically minded faction of the civilization that lived prior to the end of the last ice age, that survived the cataclysm and realized that what they had done to prepare was not enough.
Yeah.
Finding out perhaps too late, and then the oral tradition that so they come up with the idea of the oral tradition to fix that problem. But the oral tradition is more oriented towards where all the knowledge is.
Right.
Hoping that someday it would be found, as opposed to like, holy shit, we just all died.
Right. Okay, I see where you're going. Yeah.
So I'm saying that the oral tradition was a technology that arrived or was developed due to the fact that the original idea of preserving knowledge failed.
I gotcha. So then they set up this new thing to like, its job really is to communicate down through the ages the location of...
Yeah, because isn't that what it is? I mean, like everywhere we look in all of these writings, it's like...
Yeah.
It seems to be pointing to all this knowledge.
Yeah. The question I was asking, that's really cool though. The question I was asking was specifically about this festival. Like, how did we lose...
That's what I meant. Like, so...
You're saying that like in our oral traditions, they weren't so much concerned with preserving the information that would have allowed us to remember the purpose of this festival. They were more concerned about like, here's where you go to get...
That's what I was saying. So like, they didn't immediately develop the tradition for the remembrance.
Yeah.
Like so you can imagine that a year to the day, they're all looking into the sky.
Yeah.
And remembering.
Right.
And that becomes a tradition. Meanwhile, slowly over time, year after year after year, the technology of oral tradition develops for trying to preserve the preserved pieces of knowledge.
Yeah, now we need to preserve the thing that we made to preserve, the thing that we
the
couldn't
maps.
preserve. Yeah.
It's like, okay, we drew a map to this thing, but the map's no good.
Right.
So like we're going to...
missing parts, but we need to preserve it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shit. That's
a great idea.
Okay.
I'm just like, yeah, that's one of those deals where I'm like, so how did this happen? It's a great mystery. And you're like, well, I'll just tell you right now. That's badass. That's really cool. See, this is another thing we were talking about when we were talking about why. The last time we were talking about this, like a couple of weeks ago, we were discussing this when we were going to do the podcast and about why. And we were kind of discussing how we've always done this, that we've always like,
sit around
a few times a month. We just like sit down with a bunch of smokes and beers, and we try to figure shit out. Or usually I'm coming to try to fucking confuse him with stuff that's confusing me, and sometimes he just figures it out, and I'm like, holy shit, now I lost something that would confuse me. That sucks. I like mysteries, and you just destroyed one. Thanks. But so in another one of the ubiquitous TED Talks that I was listening to, this person was discussing the brain and the hemispheres and how they're completely disconnected from each other, right? And so we have this right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And this is a neuroscientist who, so some people may have heard of her. She's I don't know her name, but she's a neuroscientist who had a stroke, and she recovered from it, obviously. And so now she says, like, I was a neuroscientist who had the fascinating experience of being able to watch my brain begin to fail, right? From the inside. She got to experience it. And of course, a lot of the experiencing took place in a brain state where she no longer was a neuroscientist. She was almost not anything because her brain had failed. But it was all in her left hemisphere. Her left hemisphere was the one that had the stroke, that had this enormous aneurysm, this blood explosion. So she loses her language because your left hemisphere is what can talk, right? And she loses all of her logical thinking. She loses her linearity, the ability to see her life and her memories as a line of things that were in the past and in the present and then will be in the future. She loses that. She loses her ability to discern between her body and other objects. She no longer can tell the boundaries of her physical person. And so she was like, and so I felt enormous, like she's leaning up against the wall and she can't tell. She's looking down and she doesn't know, like her arm's against the wall, but she doesn't know that the wall is not also part of her. And so like it must be really hard to describe, but you can kind of see how, like, if you can't tell the difference between your arm and the wall, then the wall is also part of you. And you see that the wall goes way up here and it's connecting to all this other shit, and you're just enormous. Like, you connect to everything, right? And she talked about how she knew that she needed to call somebody to get help, and like she had this idea that the number that she needed to call, or the way she said it was the way that she could complete this call to do it, was that there was a stack of things in the office that had the ability. Basically, she had a bunch of business cards, and on one of the business cards was the number that would basically call the clinic where she worked, not a clinic, but it was the lab where she worked as a neuroscientist. She had a colleague there, and she was like, I need to call Dr. blah, 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 and tell him because I need help. Of course, she wasn't thinking properly, because really what she needed was an ambulance. Yeah. Right? But she was like, I need to call someone. She doesn't even know who it is. She just knows he's kind of this important guy that can help her. She said it took her forever to go through the cards because she can't read anymore, because your left hemisphere is what does language. So to her, these cards, that she was having difficulty telling the difference between herself and the cards, right? She doesn't, she's going through this stack, and like she doesn't recognize anything that's on them. But something in her mind recognized something on one of the cards, and she's like, this is the right one. She doesn't know why, but it was. And she's got the phone thing here, but she no longer she doesn't understand it or know what any of the squiggles on it mean, but she's able to like sort of hold the card and kind of compare it to the phone and sort of press the squiggles that are on the card off on the phone in the right sequence.
Wow. That's great.
And she's like, and I have no ability to recognize symbols at all. So she has to minutely compare the little squiggles to really make sure that that's the right one, because she can't even remember them. Like, she looks at it and then looking away for a second, it's gone from her mind. So she has to like hold them right next to each other and be like, okay, that is that symbol. Boop. And she pushes it. And then, of course, when the doctor answers, she hears, she can't understand speech anymore. And she was like, wow, I can't understand him at all. Then she goes to talk and she hears herself go, she
oh my God.
Yeah. But fortunately, the guy who she was talking to was also a neuroscientist, and he understood what was happening immediately when he said, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? And she spoke back like barking like a dog or whatever. So she got help. But the next thing that happened to her is her left hemisphere basically completely failed, and she was then only her right hemisphere, which is normally very suppressed by the left. The left hemisphere is the dominant part of the brain. But the right hemisphere is what does all the important shit that we think of as making us human. It's where all of our emotions are. It's where our artistic abilities are. It's where our creative abilities are. It's where our intuitive abilities are. It's where we deal with other people. And social things happen there, but it can't talk. It does not get language at all, right? So whenever, like, so somebody's giving you all this data and you've got all this information or whatever, and you're like, yeah, but something doesn't feel right. That's your right hemisphere talking to you, trying to. It doesn't have words to say, but it's trying to get your attention. So you have all this enormous left brain information, but you're just like, still kind of uncomfortable here. That's the right hemisphere. And it's really smart.
So some people call that like intuition or whatever.
That's what I'm saying. All of that stuff, everything like intuition, precognition, like anything that you consider.
It's interesting to think about it in that way, breaking it down like that, though. So I had this definition of intuition in my mind.
Like the gut thing.
Yeah, where now I'm thinking of it like, actually, no, that's like some legit shit that I just can't put into language.
It cannot be put into language.
But that side of the brain is like taking that information and like, blurp. It's like, okay,
yeah,
I need to figure out what that side of the brain is doing with it.
And your left hemisphere is
not mine.
Is like the way it operates, it cannot deal with the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere like does not deal, like they don't work well together. Well, they do really, but we're fundamentally split is what she was basically saying. And she actually had a brain. Like she actually had a human brain. Like that, you could hear the whole crowd. She's like, "This is a brain, and yes, it's a real one." She picks it up, and the spinal cord's all, and it's like dangling down there, and you can hear the whole crowd like, "Ugh." And she's like, "Yep," and she like very softly like opens it up like a flower to show you that the hemispheres are like they're only connected by this little bitty kind of ganglion wire going, and it's it's a shitload of neurons, but it's a very thin. They call it the corpus something or other. It's where the two hemispheres connect, and that's. All their communication takes place through this little tiny thin.
The internet.
Yeah, that's right. It's their fucking the wire with the like the cans at the end.
Yeah.
But some people are born with those things gone, and she says that those people are always two people. They're two separate people because the hemispheres are two separate people, and when they cannot communicate to each other at all, they will act like two totally separate personalities that will switch back and forth from running the body. But the left usually dominates. So anybody with a regular brain that has that the central the wire connecting going across, normally they interact with the world generally like I'm doing right now. Like there's a logical progression. I'm thinking linearly. There's a past and a present and a future. Right, I know who I am, and I understand the boundaries of my body. The left hemisphere is your individual. It's the thing that makes you yourself and not anyone else. The right hemisphere is like I'm connected to everything, and I am all. Right, that's how it is. That's why she couldn't no longer tell the difference between her arm and the wall. Right, but most people never can fully embody their right hemisphere. It just doesn't. The left is too strong and is too like sort of controlling. But because her left hemisphere died completely during the stroke, for a while she inhabited only her right, and she was like, this was an amazing experience, because suddenly, like even though all this horrible stuff was happening, I was like blissfully happy. She was like, this is amazing, even though she couldn't talk. She didn't think in those words. It was just the feelings, right? So eventually she has to go to lots of rehab. She has to go to the hospital. They have to all this bullshit has to happen. Now she's a normal person again that can talk and all this. She had to relearn all these abilities, right? But she still can choose at any given moment, right hemisphere or left hemisphere. She can switch back and forth between them on command. And she's like, this would be world changing if everyone could do this. Because you just easily...
Tray pan.
Yeah. Where's that old lobotomic door? Need to go back to that. But like she's like if you're feeling down or you're like you don't understand what's happening or whatever, you just she just switches over and she's like and she's with the universe and everything's amazing and badass. It's like the literal nirvana that the Buddhists seek. Like she can just switch over to it and just it's like she's like, oh my god, I am butterflies and birds and shit like that, and then she comes back to the left hemisphere, back to her normal logic linear thinking person. But having had that experience now in her linear past, she's like, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Right? So what's interesting to me, and the reason I just told that enormous TED Talk thing, you guys should just go watch the TED Talk. She does it way better than I do, is that Kyle's left-handed. So his right hemisphere knows how to talk. So if I'm up there at the top and I'm doing research or whatever, and like suddenly my right hemisphere is like, I'm like, okay, I need to go talk to Kyle because his right hemisphere can talk, and mine's trying to tell me something right now, and I don't know what it is.
But my left hemisphere can't talk. So.
Yeah.
So we make a good combination. Like we sit down and start talking about shit, and we're no matter what we do, we're approaching it from the opposite side.
That's right. But between the both of us,
but there's no way to tell which one's left or right.
That's right. Only you have to use a
weird beta decay of
that's right.
something.
That's right. At least aliens would be able to understand it. But so between us, I think of it, it's like between us, we have a brain that both hemispheres can communicate, right? Effectively. So I'll say a bunch of left hemisphere shit, and then he'll say a bunch of right hemisphere shit. But his right hemisphere has a lot of left hemisphere attributes, but it still retains some right hemisphere attributes. Like in other words, his brain is more equally it's more, it's got a lot more equality than my brain does.
I remember when
my brain is rigidly stratified.
I remember when I was like 12 or 13. Russ taught me logic. He was like, "Hey, there's this thing
called logic.
It's called logic. You should try it." And I was like, "Holy fuck!" Mind blown.
That's not even fair to use that shit.
I was like, "Damn, dude, my life just got way easier." Shit. Never look back.
Yeah, that's badass. Well, all that stuff that I said in the last segment, all that shit that I was trying to talk about that mostly comes from my right hemisphere, I learned how to dive into that shit from dealing with from talking with you.
Oh,
and it's way less.
Sorry, bro. I emoed you.
No, it's not emo. Like you have just like I could sit down and be like, well, here's all these like very rigid steps that you can take to do this. Like you do this sort of non-intuitive. I guess I should say it's intuitive. It's non-logical. But there's these ways of dealing with that kind of shit where I'm like, there's some crap that's happening to me that's emotional and overwhelming. Most people are just like, I don't, like Dad. Dad has nightmares. He doesn't even want to talk about them. He doesn't want to deal with them, right? He's just like, left hemisphere's answer to that is to ignore it, right? But we've done all this talking or whatever, and you have ways of like maneuvering through shit like that I just have to follow you. I just have to follow and hope that you know where you're going, right? So what I'm trying to say is
maybe that's the reason for those dreams.
Yeah, I also have another set of reoccurring dreams. I haven't had these in a while, but I used to tell him about them all the time, where I'd be doing something with him, and we're kind of going along. It's usually, I always think of it as in his car, but we're driving and shit, and I'm in the passenger seat, I'm smoking or whatever, and suddenly something crazy happens, like bullets start flying through the car. And he's like, God damn it, he stops the car and he gets out, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I follow him around to the back, he like flips the back of the car open, and there's all these weapons in there, and he grabs one, he's like, starts shooting it. Like he knows what's fucking happening. And I'm just like, what the actual fuck is going on? And like the rest of the dream is me following behind Kyle, trying to figure out what the fuck. And he seems to know everything that's going on, and nothing surprises him, and he's murdering all these people, and I'm just like, what the fuck?
Oh my God. Oh, shit.
So yeah, it is a lot like that with this shit. I just have to follow you and hope you know what you're doing. And I'm usually going, what the fuck? But yeah, so like the whole maneuvering through all that stuff so that I could explain something that was really deeply emotionally powerful is something that I learned watching you and working with you on doing things like lyrics and music. And like you have this method of sort of feeling that shit out and extracting maximum meaning from it. Which I had never been able to duplicate, but at least it allows me to say, I can try this and dive in, which is what I did.
Hell yeah.
So the whole thing about the brains and the hemispheres is I was basically saying this is part of the how of what we're doing. So we've had these discussions, and we're way over time here, but
who cares? We've
had these discussions ever since we stopped kicking each other's asses, which is like when I think Kyle was like 12 and we stopped doing that. He finally won, and I was like, okay, we're done. I give up. I surrender. I was not prepared to escalate to boiling water, so I just was like, this fight is over. I give up. But the discussions have always had this cadence.
Yeah.
And like we didn't know it at the time, but they follow this sort of pattern that has become incredibly powerful. Like I sort of expect it. I come down here not because I'm thinking like let's drink some beers and talk about the universe, but because I come down here because I have like very specific, very strange questions that I've been asking myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go ask these questions around Kyle, and I know that when we're done with that conversation, that I won't have answers. But I will have questions that are much further down the line than the ones that I started with. Right?
Yeah.
So that's badass. And like it also is, I'm sure there are other brothers out there that has one that's right-handed and one that's left-handed, and they do this, maybe. I don't know. A lot of people comment on how well we get along, and they're like, that's really rare. So maybe not. Like people are like, you really get along with your brother? That's wow, that's really rare, right? And I'm like, well, he's useful, He helps me get like internet points. Like I get upvotes for saying stuff that he thought of.
Yep. The best way to use somebody is to make them think you're useful.
That's right.
I'm going to use somebody.
That's right. To buy some weed. So these discussions have been like they're not just tossing like what people call bull sessions where you're just sort of throwing things around. Like they progress. They go places. Like we've had discussions that were in one night. I've had my world blown like multiple times, and when I'm going to bed, I'm like, I am a vastly different person than I was when I started this day. Yeah. Because I have like completely changed my worldview 4 times this night. Like I don't even remember who I was before. I can't imagine thinking that way anymore. So it's like
So back to the why. In that is like one of the other reasons that's not so fundamental in terms of like our individual desire to podcast, but it's that like, dude, we should like every time when we have those like mind-blowing mind explosion conversations, we're like, damn it, we should write this shit down. Somehow like catalog what we're talking about, but we never do it. So this is a way.
Writing is hard.
This is a way to do it, and it's a very convenient way to do it. And even though we have no structure, we don't have show notes, we don't have any of that shit. We just show up here and talk about shit. Yeah, it's still like just fitting it into the format of like 45 minute
numbers
segments has helped kind of hone the ideas down into.
Yeah, to distill them down into like brevity and wit.
Yeah, and it's definitely doing the podcast has, even though we began by just rehashing all of these same things that we've been talking about for years.
Yeah. Now the podcasts contain progression. Like
right.
Yeah.
It started out as sort of a rehash, but that's why it became the tangent cube.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, we started seeing patterns
talk about that. Yeah.
And like everything connects in these different ways. And like the longer we go, the more sort of we can actually pick a topic and kind of stick with it without having to go off on so many tangents. Because I don't know, it's teaching.
Well, and part of it is we're assuming our audience is now informed on those subjects and understands that they connect, but we don't need to talk about them right now. Whereas before, like when we were first starting out, you start to talk about something, you're like, oh yeah, but I got to explain this a little bit. Yeah. And I got to explain that a little bit. Well, we don't have to do that so much now because we're like, they know at least that we've explained it on a different podcast and they can go listen there or whatever.
That's true, but it's at the same time, it's helped me sort of organize in my mind like all of these different topics. Yeah. In a better way than I had before, because if I were to get in a conversation with somebody randomly about something, like it might sound like episode 2.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
But now I can have a more structured conversation and know the good lead-ins to other
and also
other topics.
Also, it's sort of like we were talking about this too. Like there's this old, I consider it like a kind of a lost art of journaling, like of keeping a journal, right? And even when it was sort of a thing to do, only a very few people did it. But they've been priceless in so many ways. Like somebody who just kept a daily journal for their entire life. Those people are priceless in terms of history, because they have these enormous collections of books. And they cataloged their every day all the way through it, and like you go through it and like it's such a good, it's such an excellent way of recording information that entire stories have been developed where that it's based on the idea that one of the characters kept a journal and like that's the narration or the over the.
Now we have Facebook, so
yeah.
So historians in the future will be like, so we really today we were eating shrimp.
Yeah, we kind of wish that we didn't have this many journals. Because like history.
The next day we went bowling and had fun.
Yeah. Oh my God! Look at my food.
Here's my baby.
But
next day.
Yeah. But old journal. The difference is that old journals were private things.
Yeah.
And so they were whereas the Facebook journal is public, and so it's edited. it's edited in such a way to sort of present.
Put a camera in front of someone and they won't be themselves,
Right.
no matter what.
That, like, people have talked about how it compounds problems of depression because you look at people's Facebook and you're like, wow, everybody's life is badass and mine sucks, right? But when they're looking at your Facebook, they think your life is badass because you're doing the same thing that they all are doing. So,
Yeah, me and Nick were talking about the antisocial network,
the antisocial
which is like where you just put everything that sucks,
yeah,
dude.
it is terrible.
Like, damn it.
You try to be not popular.
You get enemies instead of friends.
That's right. I have a lot of enemies on the antisocial network. That's a great idea. Shit. We should do that.
Well, maybe one of you Russians that is listening to this podcast can do that.
Oh yeah, why do we
Better.
have so many Russian fans?
Yeah, I don't know, but
we're
it's
checking the
badass.
metrics. We're like, holy shit, we have all these Russians listening to us.
Let's collude. We should totally collude.
Yeah. So the concept of the journal is also really fascinating to me because, if nothing else, like I've been thinking about this, like when I'm 80, if I live that long, I can go back and listen to these podcasts. Just like you could go back and read your old journals,
Yeah.
you know, and I can be like, God, I was dumb. I can't believe I thought that, or whatever, you know, like whatever you do when you read your old journals. But the other thing about doing this, and I've heard other podcasters that I respect discuss this concept a little bit, is that provided that nothing comes and just utterly destroys our civilization, these things are there forever. I mean, we've put them out into the internet, like, so hundreds of years from now, people could be listening to this episode, you know, like our potential audience.
The future us's.
Yeah. It's the future us's again. Hopefully, at some point, the people in the future, those of you way in the far future that are listening to this, have already found the Pillars of Enoch.
Yeah.
That's badass. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, they're probably like, oh man, this episode is, it's like when you listen to something that Graham Hancock was talking about right before 2012, you're like, damn it.
Yeah. Oh, here we go about that again. Yeah. Yep. Because you hear that, like, they had no idea what was about to happen. They're all like, well, I don't think anything's going to happen. You're like, you're right, but you're so fucking wrong, too. Everything changed on that day.
Yeah,
Mainly,
but that's why we're going to podcast again later and tell everyone how we were done before.
That's right.
But yeah, this was definitely great. And
Time to go to bed, though.
I'm gonna have to go listen to your
Segment
first
3.
segment 3. That was freaking badass. But thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And thank you, Laura, for the new intro.
The new intro. That's right. And we thank Eighth Room Studios, AWACS Productions, RK Enterprises. What's Nick's studio again? What's Nick's studio? What is it called?
Plus More?
Yeah. Smithsonic. Smithsonic Studios.
You talking about Plus More?
Plus More.
Yeah. You only come here for one reason. Only one reason. And that is to kick ass.
Plus More. That's right. So, yeah, thanks to Smithsonic. And thanks to all you guys that are listening. And remember, badass reviews. Shitloads of them. Especially you Russians. Get in there and fucking write some Russian reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go to the iTunes store and give some reviews on that. You can give us reviews on in Google too. Like we're totally in Google. So you go to Google Play, you can look us up for the Serpent. Tell them we're awesome. That really helps us out. And we have plans for some radio stuff that we're hopefully going to be able to do soon. Not sure when that's going to happen, but I figured that telling you guys about it will make us more likely to try to do it sooner.
That's probably true.
So yeah, thanks to all you guys. Sorry about the long unplanned hiatus, but we are back now. So get back to work, Damu. Give me some gold.
Snakes! Oh wait, that's not the stop.